Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the case. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. Story 1. The case took place in a large town in Xianfeng County, located in the southern part of Hubei Province's Anxi Autonomous Prefecture. On the afternoon of October 26, 2010, the Xianfeng County Police Command Center suddenly received an emergency call. The caller was a middle-aged man named Liang Zijuan. According to Zijuan's statement, he suspected his house had been broken into, and his wife had mysteriously disappeared. About 30 minutes after receiving the report, Xianfeng County Police quickly arrived at the scene. Zijuan's residence was located at Building 1, Yanhe Road, in the old Planning Commission residential area of Xianfeng County. It was an ordinary 3-bedroom apartment. According to Zijuan's statement, before the incident, he had gone to the Anxi city area and didn't return home until the following afternoon. When he first entered, he didn't notice anything unusual as the lights and TV in the living room were still on. But when he went into the master bedroom, Zijuan found the room in chaos. Clothes were scattered on the bed, and the drawers of the dressing table and bedside cabinet were all open. Zijuan said he tried to call his wife, Zhang Shuani, but discovered her phone was turned off and couldn't be reached. Faced with this strange situation, Zijuan had no choice but to call the police. At the chaotic scene, investigators began their examination. They discovered a horrifying sight in the closed wardrobe in the master bedroom. Among the colorful clothes, they found a barefoot wearing jeans in a curled-up position. The police felt a chill run down their spines. After pushing aside the clothes, they found a female body with closed eyes, a pale face, and no signs of life. Shuani! Shuani! The police heard screaming in their ears as Zijuan suddenly ran to the wardrobe, sobbing. The woman's body in the closet turned out to be his missing wife, Zhang Shuani. Due to the homicide, technical officers and forensic experts in charge of examining evidence also arrived at the scene. Through initial examination, forensic experts found that the victim Shuani was fully clothed with no signs of sexual assault. However, there was a wound on the back of her head caused by a hard object, suggesting that the perpetrator might have suddenly attacked Shuani from behind. Additionally, there was a clear strangulation mark on the victim's neck. Therefore, forensic experts speculated that she had been strangled to death with a rope or similar object, resulting in death by asphyxiation. However, at the crime scene, technical officers couldn't find any suspicious murder weapons. The only thing they found was a blood-stained cloth hidden in the bedroom wardrobe. Technical officers speculated that this cloth was likely used by the perpetrator to clean up the crime scene. Although they collected many fingerprints in the room, subsequent analysis revealed that these fingerprints belonged to the victim Shuani and her husband Zijuan. These signs suggested that the perpetrator might have worn gloves and deliberately erased some criminal traces at the scene after the murder. Due to the numerous signs of ransacking, investigators initially suspected this might be a burglary, followed by the elimination of witnesses. However, subsequent examination results showed this was a very illogical burglary scene. Although the belongings in the master bedroom were thoroughly ransacked, strangely, most of the gold and silver jewelry in the bedside cabinet and the cash in the wallet remained intact, untaken. The perpetrator seemed to be looking for something more important. Through Zijuan's careful comparison, only 3 items were missing from the scene. These were a wedding ring, a pair of earrings, and Shuani's mobile phone. The total value of these items was less than 5,000 yuan, about $700. This strange situation naturally made the police very suspicious. If the perpetrator was a thief, why would they leave behind expensive gold and silver jewelry and cash, only taking a phone and a few pieces of the victim's jewelry? Was it because they panicked during the crime and forgot their original purpose? But if so, why could the perpetrator still calmly clean up the scene without leaving any fingerprints or clues? To find clues, technical officers also carefully examined the doors and windows at the scene. The result was that all doors were intact with no signs of forced entry. Even the cobwebs and dirt on the outer wall and drainage pipes were undamaged. Even the dust on the windowsills remained intact with no traces or white marks. These details showed that they didn't enter the scene by climbing or breaking in. Combining all these clues, the police had an initial profile of the perpetrator. First, the perpetrator might have entered the scene easily, likely someone known to the victim or someone she didn't guard against. Second, the perpetrator had strong anti-investigation capabilities, possibly someone with a prior criminal record. Third, the perpetrator wasn't simply motivated by theft, but might have had other motives. Based on these initial profiles, the police decided to conduct a comprehensive investigation into Shiuni's social relationships. As a result, they quickly discovered several very strange situations. After the incident, Shiuni's body was quickly taken to Xianfeng County Police for more detailed examination. News of her murder at home gradually spread throughout the area. With her beautiful face and natural singing talent, Shiuni was considered a renowned folk singer in the Unshi Autonomous Prefecture. She often appeared performing on local media. Therefore, local people were very curious about Shiuni's mysterious death. But no one knew what she had gone through on the night of the incident. Regarding his wife's sudden death, Zijun also seemed very surprised. According to his statement on the evening of the incident, he had called Shiuni, and everything was normal then. She was alone at home watching TV while embroidering cloth shoes. Through examination, the forensic doctor determined the time of death to be between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. on the night of the incident. However, this precise time frame made the Xianfeng police feel very strange. Because if the perpetrator was an intruder with the purpose of theft, they would surely choose midnight to act, not when the homeowner wasn't yet sound asleep. In other words, the female singer Shiuni might have been killed out of hatred or love affairs. However, regarding this bold speculation, Shiuni's mother Chen Yongfeng disagreed. According to Mrs. Chun, her daughter was very gentle and had never had conflicts or grudges with anyone. Although Shiuni had a previous marriage, she had divorced peacefully with her ex-husband without any emotional conflicts. Through subsequent investigation and interrogation, the police learned that Shiuni's mother, Mrs. Chun, also had complex social relationships. In Hubei Province's Unshi Autonomous Prefecture, she was a highly skilled Tujia ethnic embroidery artisan and a representative of Hubei Province's intangible cultural heritage. Usually, Mrs. Chun ran a Tujia embroidery workshop, and Shiuni often came to help at the workshop. She was the successor her mother carefully trained. But Mrs. Chun could never have imagined that her beloved daughter would be suddenly murdered at home. As the investigation deepened, police conducted a comprehensive investigation into Shiuni and Zijuan's social relationships. All those possibly related to the case were interrogated and checked in turn. However, these relatives and friends all provided alibis for themselves. On the afternoon of the second day after the incident, the investigation had reached a deadlock. And at this moment, the police suddenly came up with a bold investigative direction. They discovered that as the victim's husband, Zijun appeared too calm during the investigation. He didn't seem like someone who had just suffered the pain of losing his wife. Based on this suspicion, the investigators first met with Mrs. Chun and asked about her son-in-law Zijuan's daily behavior. As a result, Mrs. Chun once again strongly disagreed with the police's suspicion. According to her account, around May 2009, Shiuni had met Zijuan. Shortly after that, they got married. In her impression, Zijuan was a caring, filial, and considerate son-in-law. Whenever Shiuni felt unwell, he would always put aside his work and return home to take care of her attentively. Although in the eyes of outsiders, the marital relationship between Zijuan and Shiuni was very harmonious, the police still felt there was something strange about Zijuan's behavior after the incident. To not miss any possibilities, the police decided to investigate his specific whereabouts before and after the incident. According to Zijuan's statement on October 25th before the incident, he went alone to the central hospital in the Anchi City area for a medical examination and didn't return home to Xianfeng County until the afternoon of October 26th. To verify Zijuan's statement, the police later went to the Anchi City area to collect surveillance footage and relevant witness statements. According to a street surveillance camera in the Anchi City area, at 7:02 p.m. on the night of the incident, Zijuan was walking on a local street. Additionally, investigators found a local hotel employee. According to this employee's statement, around 10 p.m. on the night of the incident, Zijuan was indeed in the hotel and had talked with him. The distance from the Anchi City area to the crime scene in Xianfeng County was about 62 miles. Even calculating at 62 miles per hour, it would take more than an hour to travel from the Anchi City area to Xianfeng County. In other words, Zijuan would hardly have had enough time to travel between the two locations to commit the crime. After the suspicion about Zijuan was eliminated, the police investigation once again reached a deadlock. At this point, they hadn't yet realized that the breakthrough to expose the whole truth of the case was quietly lying in an inconspicuous corner of the scene. 3 days had passed since the incident. Zijuan and Mrs. Chen came to the police station almost every day to ask about the progress of the investigation. Along with the local people's buzzing discussions, the police were under great pressure to solve the case. To find a breakthrough, the then Deputy Chief of Xianfeng County Police, Zhang Rongjong, decided to return to the scene with 2 technical officers for a second examination. After the incident, the victim's room had been completely sealed off by the police. The entire scene still maintained its initial state after the crime was reported. Although the perpetrator had carefully cleaned up the scene, this time Rongjong and his colleagues still collected an incomplete shoe print in an inconspicuous corner of the living room. Through measurements, technical officers discovered this shoe print came from a size 6 US shoe. This discovery made them very excited because the shoes Zijuan wore when entering the scene were size 8.5 US. In other words, this size 6 shoe print wasn't left by Zijuan. Based on previous profiles of the perpetrator, the police decided to once again summon all acquaintances around Shuani and Zijuan for trace analysis and comparison. This included Shuani's ex-husband, Zijuan's ex-wife, and several relatives and friends from both sides, totaling more than 20 key suspects. However, after comparison, all these people were eliminated because their shoe sizes were all larger than size 6. Although such extensive screening didn't bring any breakthrough clues, the police still firmly believed that this incomplete shoe print must still contain some undiscovered clues. Therefore, Rongjong specially invited a footprint expert from the Hubei Provincial Police Department, Meng Xiaopin, to help analyze the clues. Xiaopin carefully observed this size 6 shoe print and quickly discovered something unusual. Xiaopin explained to the task force members that in this shoe print, the toe, front shoulder, and heel all had clear pressure marks, but the arch was in an empty state with no pressure marks. This situation showed that the person who left the shoe print must have been wearing shoes too small for their feet. In other words, the shoe size that the perpetrator usually wore must be larger than size 6. Xiaopin believed the perpetrator's actual shoe size must be around size 8 US, age above 35, height between 5 feet 5 inches and 5 feet 7 inches, weight between 143 and 154 pounds, with a medium slightly thin build. The perpetrator, deliberately wearing small shoes to disguise footprints, showed they had some understanding of Chinese police criminal investigation methods. But what they didn't know was that Chinese police had reached a high level in examining and analyzing traces and footprints. Moreover, afterward, Xiaopin went to the scene and sprinkled powder on the floors of the rooms. Although the perpetrator had used cloth to wipe before, some remaining blood stains and footprints on the floor gradually appeared. Based on these hidden footprints, technical officers quickly restored the perpetrator's general movement route in the room. The place with the most hidden footprints was the living room of the scene. This showed that the perpetrator had carried out the killing here. Afterward, they had moved the body into the master bedroom and hidden it in the wardrobe. Additionally, bloody footprints also appeared in the dining room and adjacent bathroom. From this, technical officers deduced they had gone to the bathroom to get a cloth for wiping and then proceeded to clean up the scene. From these movement routes, it could be seen that the perpetrator was extremely calm. However, Xiaopin was still confident in promising the police that as long as they found all suspicious persons, he could identify the perpetrator within 2 hours. Therefore, the police again summoned more than 20 suspects who had been screened before, had them wear size 6 shoes, and took their footprints. However, after Xiaopin compared them one by one, the footprints of all suspects didn't match in terms of pressure points and shape. Could the police have missed any other relatives or friends? Time passed to October 31st, 2010, 7 days after the incident. They decided to return to the scene for the 3rd time. At the scene, Rongjong and his colleagues accidentally saw Shuani and Zijuan's wedding photos. These photos made them think of something called a gift money register. The so-called gift money register is when 2 people get married. Those who attend the wedding record the amount of money they give as gifts in a register. In other words, in Shuani and Zijuan's gift money register, there must still be records of many relatives and friends' names, and the real perpetrator might be hidden among them. Following this investigative direction, investigators quickly found Shuani and Zijuan's gift money register. However, they discovered a very strange situation. In this register, A corner of one page had been torn off. Based on the size and arrangement of characters on the page, the torn-off part must have contained about 5 to 6 names. To clarify exactly what these names were, the police again found Zijuan to assist in the investigation. However, due to the large number of wedding attendees, Zijuan couldn't remember at that time. And at this moment, Rongjong and his colleagues thought of something else. Usually, before holding a wedding, people would make a list of relatives and friends to invite. Although this invitation list didn't necessarily have to completely match the later gift money register, the initial draft might contain more names. Therefore, the police immediately acted and found an original draft of the gift money register in a paper box at the scene. Through careful comparison, Xianfeng police discovered that 7 people appeared in this original draft but weren't recorded in the official gift money register. After screening each person afterward, finally, only one suspicious subject remained, named Lu Hushan. Although the original draft still recorded his phone number, this phone number could no longer be contacted. This mysterious situation increased the police's suspicion. But who is Lu Hushan? The police asked relatives of both Xuani and Zijuan, and all said they didn't know him. Next, the police searched for the name Lu Hushan in the population information system. But strangely, there were no registration records of him in the local population information. Based on previous case-solving experience, investigators began using some homophonic and similar-sounding words to search more broadly. As a result, they luckily found a middle-aged man named Lu Hushan. However, relatives of Zhang Xuani and Liang Zijuan still claimed they didn't know Lu Hushan. Through subsequent investigation, they learned that Lu Hushan was 32 years old and was originally a folk artist. Usually, he mainly did performances like lion dancing and dragon dancing. But later, due to business failure, he had no stable income and owed several $1,000s. 2 days later, police went to Hushan's residence and found he wasn't home. But on the floor, they still collected some shoe prints. Through subsequent analysis and comparison, technical officers were surprised to discover that among them were 2 shoe prints that completely matched the size 6 shoe prints left at the crime scene. This unexpected clue came too suddenly. The police basically determined that Hushan was highly suspicious of committing the crime, although his motive for the crime was still a mystery. After many efforts to search, the police finally got clues about Hushan's hiding place from a mahjong parlor. About 5 days ago, he had moved into a relatively remote rented room on the outskirts of a town in Xianfeng County. To avoid alerting the suspect, police decided to implement a secret arrest operation. First, they organized a tight surveillance around the boarding house, then sent 6 plainclothes officers to secretly enter the room where Hushan was staying. In less than 30 seconds, the plainclothes officers subdued and handcuffed him. However, the interrogation after the arrest didn't go smoothly. Faced with police questions, Hushan first remained silent for a full day and night, then refused to admit any connection to Xuani's death. The interrogation officer had to present the footprint evidence comparison. At this point, Lu Hushan finally spoke up and posed a thought-provoking question, and this question directly exposed an extremely carefully concealed conspiracy. In the interrogation room, the suspect Hushan's first words made the investigators feel somewhat puzzled. He asked if someone uses a knife to harm another person, who bears the greater guilt, the person or the knife. Initially, the police felt Hushan seemed to be asking a meaningless question. But after careful consideration, the interrogation officer suddenly realized that Hushan was implying that he was merely a knife, and behind him was a mastermind who borrowed the knife to kill. After multiple interrogations, he finally admitted to the crime and revealed the mastermind who directed him to commit the murder. And this mastermind was none other than Liang Zijuan, the victim's husband. According to Hushan's confession, he and Zijuan were former colleagues. Later, they had also done business together. Although the business failed, they maintained close contact afterward. Hushan stated that Zijuan had instigated him to kill his wife, Xuani, to collect a large insurance payout. And under Zijuan's meticulous plan, this murder scheme for insurance fraud had attempted 4 times, only succeeding on the attempt. On December 28, 2010, police arrested suspect Liang Zijuan. However, when faced with irrefutable evidence, Liang Zijuan uttered a shocking statement. "Whoever marries me, I would kill them." It turned out that the marriage between Zijuan and Xuani had been a carefully designed trap from the beginning. According to Zijuan's confession, he was originally a worker at Xianfeng Tobacco Factory, then switched to working as a driver for his brother-in-law's mining company, earning over 3,000 yuan, about $440 per month. However, whether it was the stable job at the tobacco factory or the daily hard work of driving, these laborious jobs made him feel dissatisfied. He desperately wanted to escape ordinary life, always dreaming of becoming rich overnight to live a luxurious life. But the path to wealth seemed to always be unlucky for him. Until one chance occasion, Zijuan said he had watched a Western movie about insurance fraud by killing chickens. Afterward, the unfulfilled dream of wealth in his heart seemed to suddenly be ignited. After some thought, he conceived a cruel scheme. He decided to apply the method from the movie to his wife. At that time, Zijuan was still not divorced from his ex-wife Sun Muching. To implement the plan, he first found multiple insurance policies for Muching and created opportunities for her to sign insurance applications. But unexpectedly, Muching refused and told him, "Our family is already so poor we don't have enough money to spend. Why do we need to buy so much insurance?" At this point, Zijuan feared the insurance fraud plan would be exposed, so he temporarily suspended the plan. Not long after, he proposed divorce to Muching. However, after the divorce, Zijuan still didn't give up his path to wealth. He continued to look for his next target. Due to work, he later became acquainted with Zhang Yongjian, the director of the Xianfeng County branch of Enchi Transport Company. And Zhang Yongjian was Zhang Sunni's father. At that time, Sunni was already divorced. After her first failed marriage, she had returned home to Xianfeng County from Guangzhou City in Guangdong Province. Under the matchmaking of Mr. Zhang Yongjian, Zijuan, who appeared honest and simple on the outside, very naturally got to know the beautiful singer Zhang Sunni. In Zijuan's eyes, Sunni had grown up in a well-off family, had a rather naive personality, and didn't guard against others. Without doubt, this was a rare target. With Mr. Zhang Yongjian's help, he quickly won Sunni's heart. As for the plan to kill his wife for insurance money, he still never gave up. Even before marriage, on July 15, 2009, Zijuan had bought Sunni her first personal accident insurance policy with a maximum coverage of 240,000 yuan, about $35,300. But at this time, Sunni was immersed in passionate love and had no suspicion about his evil scheme. Until October 1, 2009, 41-year-old Liang Zijuan and 29-year-old Zhang Sunni officially married. Less than 3 months after marriage, Zijuan continued to push forward with his plan. On December 15, 2009, he bought a second insurance policy for Sunni, and this time the maximum coverage was 500,000 yuan, about $73,500. Not long after, he persuaded his wife to buy a third personal accident insurance policy with a maximum coverage of 320,000 yuan, about $47,000. At this point, the total death benefit from Sunni's 3 insurance policies had reached 1,060,000 yuan, about $155,800. And of course, the beneficiary of all these insurance payouts was Liang Zijuan. After everything was prepared, he began implementing the second part of the plan, which was borrowing a knife to kill. First, he approached his former colleague Lu Fushan and revealed the entire plan to kill his wife for insurance money. Initially, Fushan showed hesitation at Zijuan's proposal, thinking the plan was too risky and dangerous. However, when Zijuan offered a payment of 60,000 yuan, about $8,800, Fushan, who was drowning in debt, began to waver. Seeing Fushan still hesitating, Zijuan decided to increase the temptation. He promised that once he received the insurance money, Fushan would receive 100,000 yuan, about $14,700, in payment. When hearing this huge sum of money, the previously hesitant Fushan immediately agreed. Thus, this dirty exchange was established. After the Chinese New Year in 2010, the two decided to act. Zijuan secretly directed Fushan to monitor Sunni and choose an appropriate time to strike. To avoid suspicion, he specifically requested leave from his unit for 2 days and lied about going to Chongqing City for medical treatment. However, during the surveillance, Sunni happened to go out with friends, so Fushan couldn't find a suitable opportunity to strike. After this first failed attempt, Zijuan realized that if they wanted to execute the plan, they needed to think of a more discreet method. By May 2010, Zijuan took advantage of his job as a driver at the mining company to secretly bring home some explosives and detonators. This time, he decided to use a detonation device to create a fire, disguising it as a sudden accident to achieve the purpose of destroying the body. According to Zijuan's confession, he had secretly hidden explosives behind the gas tank in the kitchen, then placed detonators beside it. Finally, he placed a mosquito coil next to the detonators. The plan was to secretly light the mosquito coil, and its spark would ignite the detonator, finally causing the explosives and gas tank to explode, creating an explosion that would appear to be caused by improper gas use. After preparing everything, Zijuan once again took sick leave and left Xianfeng County. Meanwhile, Fushan took Liang Zijuan's house keys and secretly broke into the apartment. He hid behind the living room curtains, quietly waiting for Sunny to return home. According to Fushan's account, he planned to wait until Sunny went to shower, then light the mosquito coil and quietly leave. Unfortunately, that evening, due to working overtime, Sunny didn't return home until 2 a.m. Waiting for too long made Lu Fushan completely lose patience, and without waiting for Sunny to fall asleep, he hastily went to the kitchen to light the mosquito coil. However, he unexpectedly made too much noise and caught Sunny's attention. She thought there was a thief and quickly called Zijuan. At this point, Zijuan knew the plan was about to be exposed, so he immediately comforted Sunny to stay in the master bedroom, lock the door, and not come out. Then he notified Fushan to quickly retreat. The meticulous plan failed again, and Zijuan could only wait for the next suitable opportunity. But he worried Sunny would discover the detonation device in the kitchen, so he decided to abandon this action plan and secretly remove the explosives and detonators. Not long after, Zijuan thought of an easier murder plan. He wanted Fushan to secretly break into his house, first kill his wife Sunny with a weapon, then stage the scene as a burglary followed by witness elimination. This way, local police would view it as a theft-murder case. As long as Fushan cleaned the scene thoroughly, the police wouldn't be able to investigate them. Therefore, on August 13, 2010, Zijuan, while away, once again directed Fushan to act. Around 1 a.m. that day, Fushan took Zijuan's house keys, intending to quietly open the door. But unexpectedly, the vigilant Sunny had locked the door from inside. The third attempt ended in failure. Time passed to October 2010. Seeing that the 3 insurance policies he had bought for Sunny were about to expire, and the chance to receive the huge compensation was about to slip away, Zijuan became increasingly anxious. After 3 previous failed attempts, Zijuan realized that having Lu Fushan secretly break in was no longer feasible. So he changed the plan, this time deciding to let Fushan enter his house openly. On October 25, 2010, Zijuan once again used the excuse of going for medical treatment, traveling alone to the Yangshi City area to create an alibi for the time. Before leaving, he specifically instructed his wife. "Tonight, a friend will come to pick up a bank card. I've left it in the drawer under the coffee table in the living room. Just give it to him." At this point, Shuni didn't think much of it, completely trusting her husband's arrangement. And this seemingly normal arrangement would create a perfect opportunity for Fushan to strike. Additionally, Zijuan told Lu Fushan to definitely wear large-size shoes, saying this could mislead the police investigation. However, when preparing the shoes, Lu Fushan found that large shoes were easy to slip off, so he had to choose a pair of small shoes that didn't fit. Around 9 p.m. that night, Fushan wore a backpack prepared to go to Shuni's house. In the backpack, he had prepared an iron hammer and rope. Following Zijuan's instructions, Lu Fushan skillfully avoided the surveillance cameras around and arrived at Shuni's house to ring the doorbell. After entering, Shuni welcomed Fushan warmly without any suspicion. But just as she bent down to get the bank card, Fushan quickly pulled out the iron hammer, striking hard at the back of her head. After a loud noise, Shuni fell to the ground before she could react. At this point, Fushan took out the rope to finish off Shuni. The frenzied murder happened so quickly and unexpectedly that poor Zhang Shuni, until her final moment, never knew that all of this was a long-planned conspiracy by the husband she trusted. After interrogation, Fushan pointed out the location where he disposed of the murder weapons, and the police successfully found the hammer. On September 23, 2011, the Enshi Autonomous Prefecture Intermediate People's Court issued its first instance verdict. Defendant Liang Zijuan was sentenced to death for the crime of intentional homicide. Defendant Lu Fushan was sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve for the crime of intentional homicide. Next, we'll explore a case that occurred on Jimodo Island in Yosu City, Hoyeonam Province, South Korea. The main characters are a remarried couple. The husband, Park Tae-hyun, 50, worked as an insurance consultant. His wife, Kim Soo-yeon, 47, was a restaurant server. The couple lived in downtown Yosu. One day in 2018, they drove to Jipu village on Jimodo Island for a trip when tragedy struck. At 10:56 p.m. on Monday, December 31st, the Yosu 119 Safety Center received a desperate emergency call. On the other end was a woman's panicked voice screaming, "Help me. I can't open the door or windows. It's too dark. I can't see anything. The car is sinking. It's sinking." The dispatcher urgently asked for the woman's location, but she was clearly too panicked to hear the operator's questions, only repeatedly asking what to do. The call lasted about 4 minutes before the woman stopped speaking. After that, the sound of gurgling water could be heard before the call disconnected. The dispatcher realized the situation was dire and quickly traced the call location through the phone signal. They quickly determined the call came from a dock near Jipu village in central Jimodo Island. The rescue team immediately departed for the scene. When they arrived, the scene was crowded with curious locals buzzing with conversation. A man sat crying desperately on the dock. It was Tae-hyun. Seeing the rescue team, Tae-hyun grabbed onto them like a lifeline, saying in a hoarse voice, "Please save my wife." She fell into the sea. Soo-yeon, Tae-hyun's wife, was 47 years old, born into an ordinary family in Yosu City with several siblings. She left school early to work and met her first husband through friends' introductions. From her first marriage, she had a son and daughter, both living with her. Soo-yeon was working at a restaurant in Yosu, and it was here that she happened to meet Tae-hyun, a single father 3 years her senior. Their conversations seemed endless, and they gradually developed feelings for each other. On December 6, 2018, Soo-yeon divorced her first husband, but just 4 days later, she registered her marriage with Tae-hyun. After holding a simple wedding, they began their new life together. Initially, everything was developing positively, but unexpectedly, less than a month after marriage, Soo-yeon met with disaster. At the dock, Tae-hyun sobbed, describing Soo-yeon as a gentle woman who always cared for him. They had worked hard to build their new home together, never expecting such a tragic accident. The rescue workers patiently consoled Tae-hyun, though they knew that with the time that had passed, his wife's chances of survival were very slim. Tae-hyun explained that he and his wife had only been married a short time and were still in their honeymoon period. That afternoon, the last day of 2018, his wife had suggested going to Jimodo Island to watch the first sunrise of the new year. So the couple drove from downtown to Jimodo Island. They visited Yichun Dock and Yuhak Dock for sightseeing, then moved on to Jipu village. Instead of booking a hotel, they decided to drive to the dock near the village and sleep in the car while waiting for the New Year's sunrise. By 10 p.m., Soo-yeon was sleeping in the passenger seat. Tae-hyun wasn't sleepy, so he went out to smoke. During that time, he checked if the tires had enough air. When he reached the right rear tire, for some unknown reason, the car suddenly began slowly sliding forward. He realized something was wrong and quickly tried to grab the door handle, but it was futile. It turned out their parking spot wasn't level with a slope nearby, and soon the car had slid to the sloped area. He rushed to the passenger side, trying to open the door to wake his deeply sleeping wife, but found the doors were locked and couldn't be opened. At this point, Tae-hyun was banging on the car window and calling Soo-yeon's name, but his wife couldn't hear him at all. Thus, he was forced to watch helplessly as his wife and the car slid into the sea. In that moment of panic, he completely froze, not knowing what to do. The car slowly sank, each moment passing like a nightmare that he could see clearly. He stood on the dock screaming desperately, hoping his shouts might wake Soo-yeon, and she would find a way to escape. When he heard faint cries for help coming from the sinking car, he jumped into the sea to save his wife. But because he couldn't swim, and with the pitch-black night making it impossible to see the water's surface, after several failed attempts, he had to return to the dock in despair. Tae-hyun tried to call for help, but realized his phone was left in the car. He stood on the dock shouting loudly, hoping someone nearby would hear. But it was already past 10 p.m., and there was no one around the dock. With no choice, he had to run toward the village for help, finally running into a guest house to seek assistance. With the guest house owner's help, he called the 119 rescue team. When he returned to the dock, the car had completely disappeared beneath the dark water, with no trace of his wife. Realizing nothing could be done, he collapsed onto the dock, sobbing in desperation. The bad news spread quickly, and villagers began gathering. However, on that pitch-black night, No one dared risk going into the sea for a rescue. Everyone stood helplessly, waiting for professional rescue workers to arrive. As soon as the rescue team arrived at the scene, they discovered several suspicious details. First, the protective railings on both sides of the dock were very sturdy, but one section was severely deformed as if it had taken a strong impact. A fisherman working there confirmed the railing had been intact before. Even more suspiciously, although Tae-yoon claimed he had jumped into the sea trying to save his wife, his clothes were strangely dry. From these irregularities, the rescue workers formed a bold hypothesis. They suspected this wasn't simply an accidental tragedy, but possibly a carefully orchestrated plan by Tae-yoon. They immediately notified the police. Receiving the report, police quickly arrived at the scene. When Tae-yoon saw the police appear, he showed momentary surprise but quickly regained composure and declared his willingness to cooperate with the investigation. Faced with police questioning, Tae-yoon firmly maintained his initial statement, insisting his wife's accident was unintentional. When asked about the deformed dock railing, Tae-yoon claimed no knowledge of this, suggesting it may have been damaged before they arrived. Later, police visited the guest house where he had called for help to investigate. The guest house owner's testimony raised more suspicions. According to the owner, when Tae-yoon appeared to ask for help calling rescue services, his demeanor was extremely calm, showing no signs of panic or worry. He even casually walked around the guest house, appearing no different from a normal guest aside from requesting to use the phone. This behavior made police increasingly suspicious. It was hard to understand how someone witnessing their spouse in life-threatening danger could maintain such unusual composure. This clearly wasn't the natural reaction of a husband in that situation. When confronted, Tae-yoon defended himself, saying his wandering around the guest house was to look for any rescue equipment that might be useful. He insisted he was actually very panicked, but tried to suppress showing it externally. In such an emergency situation, I had to stay calm. Otherwise, who could my wife rely on? Tae-yoon explained. However, these justifications failed to convince the police. To uncover the truth, they decided to check surveillance camera footage from the dock. Unfortunately, the cameras didn't capture the car sliding into the sea, nor the moment Tae-yoon allegedly jumped in to save his wife. The only thing captured was Tae-yoon walking alone toward the guest house at 10:57 p.m. that night. Through the surveillance footage, police saw him leisurely walking toward the village, completely unhurried, his clothes appearing dry, as if deliberately taking his time, purposely not wanting rescue teams to arrive too quickly. Regarding this, Tae-yoon explained that he had never been to Jimodo Island before, wasn't familiar with the terrain. And additionally, it was dark and he couldn't see the road clearly, which is why he walked so slowly. During the investigation into the suspect's background, police learned that Tae-yoon, age 50, working as an insurance consultant, had a failed previous marriage. From this marriage, he had 3 daughters. Initially, the family lived a modest but peaceful life. However, gradually, his ex-wife began feeling dissatisfied with his earning capacity, frequently complaining that he couldn't provide a better life for her and their children. Financial conflicts became increasingly intense, leading to endless arguments. Finally, the marriage ended and the 3 daughters lived with Tae-yoon. Wanting to provide a better life for his children, Tae-yoon constantly changed jobs, from server to salesperson. However, in December 2012, desperate with debt reaching 80 million won, approximately $61,500, he and a friend committed a robbery of 52 million won, approximately $40,000, in Yosu, and were quickly arrested by police. When arrested, Tae-yoon confessed his crimes frankly. He explained that with 3 school-aged children, tuition fees were an unavoidable burden, and he only resorted to crime out of desperation. For the theft charge, he was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison. In 2014, after completing his prison sentence, Tae-yoon survived on temporary jobs and driving tourist buses. In May 2018, he applied for an insurance consultant position, but was rejected due to his criminal record. Later, he applied for a similar position at another company and was hired. After joining the company, Tae-yoon focused on learning the business through training programs, quickly mastering insurance product details and compensation clauses. Notably, he actively researched potential customer information and skillfully created chance meetings for approaching them. Through these efforts, he rapidly became proficient at his job and achieved impressive sales results. In late September 2018, Tae-yoon noticed Soo-yeon, a potential customer on his insurance prospect list. Discovering she worked at a restaurant he frequently visited, he meticulously planned to accidentally meet and approach her under the guise of insurance consultation. Learning she was separated and preparing for divorce, Tae-yoon became increasingly active in maintaining contact, from travel opportunities to attractive insurance package offers. This strategy proved effective as they quickly developed romantic feelings for each other. On October 26th, under Tae-yoon's persuasion, Soo-yeon purchased a total of 3 insurance products, including 2 policies with coverage of $1,001, approximately $770,000. On November 9th, he had her buy dental insurance. And on November 20th, she purchased another policy worth $100,001, approximately $77,000. At this point, being deeply in love, Soo-yeon had no suspicions and continuously signed insurance contracts following Tae-yoon's sweet talk. To create an impression of financial capability, he sold his old car to buy a used luxury car, the same fateful vehicle that would later sink into the sea. Not stopping there, Tae-yoon painted a beautiful future vision by promising to buy land on a beautiful island and build a house for their retirement together. Completely convinced by Tae-yoon's promises, just 4 days after finalizing her divorce, Soo-yeon hastily married him. Immediately afterward, from December 12th to 13th, Tae-yoon began suspicious activities. First using Soo-yeon's name to buy damage insurance for his car, then changing the beneficiary in all her insurance contracts to his name. He even secretly transferred the beneficiary rights to his brother without informing Soo-yeon. During the investigation, police questioned Soo-yeon's 2 children about their stepfather. Her older son said his stepfather was very good, often taking care of him, treating him to fancy restaurants whenever he had free time, and taking him to interesting places. He quite liked his stepfather. After his mother remarried, she seemed much happier. Before the incident, his mother had been acting normally, with no strange behavior. Soo-yeon's younger daughter also said she had a good impression of her stepfather. Initially, she worried that after her mother remarried, she might pay less attention to her brother and herself, but that wasn't the case. Their stepfather was meticulous, sometimes even more attentive to her than her mother. Despite Soo-yeon's children portraying Tae-yoon as a devoted stepfather, police remained cautious. They believed the brief time since the marriage wasn't sufficient to evaluate Tae-yoon's true character. In further investigation, police discovered that after marriage, Tae-yoon had changed the beneficiary of 6 insurance policies Soo-yeon had purchased to his name. The total coverage of these 6 contracts amounted to 1.25 billion won, approximately $962,000, primarily related to death by accident, traffic accidents, and similar circumstances. Police believed this was Tae-yoon's motive. He had carefully planned this accident, aiming to collect this enormous insurance payout. As an insurance consultant, he understood every insurance clause in detail. After coincidentally meeting Soo-yeon, he had targeted her insurance policies. He hadn't truly loved her, but pretended to pursue her, quickly marrying her after gaining her trust and rushing to change the beneficiary names to his own. After everything was prepared, he lured Soo-yeon to Jimodo Island to execute his sinister plan. Police also learned that Tae-yoon lived modestly, had 3 daughters to support, faced significant life pressures, and struggled financially. Someone had seen him write a note in his phone titled, "My Life Philosophy," which included the line, "I don't want to pass poverty down to my children." Although all clues pointed to Tae-yoon murdering his wife, he continued to deny it, instead accusing the police of making wild speculations without concrete evidence in their attempt to blame him. Subsequently, police questioned Tae-yoon's 3 daughters. They all stated that their father was an honest, upright person. Although he had made mistakes in the past, these were due to life's pressures and didn't mean he was a bad person. Since their parents' divorce, their father had shouldered all their living expenses. He was frugal with himself and had never mistreated them. By the afternoon following the incident, police had recovered the car from the seabed. It was a silver gray 2008 Genesis. Upon inspection, the front windshield was completely shattered. The rear had clear impact damage, and the trunk was open. Soo-yeon was found in the passenger seat, showing no signs of life. 2 phones were found in the car, one belonging to Soo-yeon and one to Tae-yoon, both unusable due to water damage. The forensic report showed Soo-yeon died from drowning, with time of death around 11 p.m. on December 31st. After recovering the car, police quickly discovered suspicious points. According to Tae-yoon, the car should have slid into the waterfront first, so the broken windshield could be explained by water pressure or underwater rocks. But if the rear entered the water last, why was there impact damage? And why was the trunk open? Additionally, police found another suspicious detail in the car. The gear shifter was in neutral, and this was unusual. Tae-yoon had parked at the dock to wait for sunrise. Leaving the car in neutral would risk it rolling, unless that was intentional. During police questioning, Tae-yoon offered an explanation for the sequence of events. According to him, the car was initially parked at the dock's edge, as it was an ideal spot for watching the sunrise. However, his wife felt unsafe there and asked him to back up. During this backing up process, he accidentally hit the protective railing, causing its deformation. Afterward, he habitually left the car in neutral and got out to check the situation. At that moment, the car unexpectedly slid into the sea. As for the open trunk, he suggested it might have been forced open by water pressure as the car sank. However, this testimony revealed serious contradictions with his previous statements. Notably, in his first statement, he firmly claimed no knowledge of the damaged railing, but now admitted he had backed into it. This inconsistency in his testimony further increased suspicions about his role in the incident. Significantly, Tae-yoon had worked as a tourist bus driver, indicating his driving skills were excellent, and he would have known the danger of leaving a car in neutral. Such a basic error seemed unlikely from an experienced driver. Regarding this, Tae-yoon explained that he hadn't known an accident would happen to his wife. If he had, he would certainly have put the car in park. He said he hadn't thought much about it at the time, believing that getting out to check the car briefly would be fine with the car in neutral. Who could have known that one moment of carelessness would lead to tragedy? He suggested strong sea winds combined with the slope might have caused the car to slide gradually. This explanation didn't reduce police suspicions. There was another suspicious detail about the car. One of the rear windows was open. Measurements showed a 2.75-inch gap. If all the windows had been closed when the car fell into the sea, it wouldn't have sunk immediately. However, with an open window, water would quickly flood the passenger compartment, causing the car to sink rapidly. At the time, Soo-yeon was in the passenger seat. If she had felt hot and wanted to open a window, she would likely have opened her own window. But when the car was recovered, the passenger window was tightly closed while the rear window was slightly open. This couldn't help but raise suspicions. Police suspected Tae-hyun had deliberately opened the rear window to make the car sink faster. But Tae-hyun expressed outrage at this speculation, saying the open rear window was his wife's idea. He claimed she had initially opened her passenger window because she felt hot, but later closed it due to strong winds, and asked him to open the rear window instead. This way, they could have some ventilation without too much cold air. Although Tae-hyun tried to deny his crime, by this point, all evidence suggested Soo-yeon's death was not a simple accident. With a clear motive established, police arrested him on suspicion of intentional murder. According to the investigation results, on the night of the incident, Tae-hyun had parked the car on the dock slope, used poor air circulation as an excuse to open the rear window, and then had intimate relations with Soo-yeon in the car. Afterward, claiming discomfort, he backed up the car, saying they would go to a hotel. During this process, he deliberately hit the protective railing, then used the pretext of checking the damage to put the car in neutral without engaging the parking brake. He got out of the car alone for inspection, causing Soo-yeon and the vehicle to slide down the dock's ramp into the sea. 1 year after the incident, the trial opened at the Sunshin branch of the Gwangju District Court. At trial, the prosecutor argued that defendant Park Tae-hyun, due to financial difficulties, particularly the pressure of supporting his daughters after divorce, had planned this incident. He murdered Soo-yeon, disguising it as an accident to fraudulently collect insurance money. On December 31, 2018, Tae-hyun had lured the victim to Jipu village dock on Gumado Island under the pretense of watching the sunrise. He then deliberately backed into the dock's protective railing, shifted to neutral, and got out to check the situation. Subsequently, Tae-hyun pushed the car from behind, causing it to slide into the sea. The defense argued that while Tae-hyun did have debt problems and wasn't wealthy, his situation wasn't desperate enough to commit murder for money. Moreover, there was no evidence showing he had pushed the car after exiting it. They suggested the car might have accidentally slid into the sea due to strong winds. The prosecutor maintained that Tae-hyun's financial difficulties were his motive for the crime. Additionally, as an experienced driver, leaving the car in neutral was clearly intentional. Opening a rear window in cold winter weather was highly unusual. Latest investigation results showed the defendant had visited the scene on December 24th, a week before the incident. This behavior raised further suspicions. The car couldn't have slid into the sea without external force, further proving the unnatural nature of the accident. After a period of trial, the court found defendant Tae-hyun guilty of intentional murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment. After the trial concluded, Tae-hyun, dissatisfied with the verdict, appealed to the Gwangju High Court. At the appellate court, defendant Tae-hyun declared his complete innocence, stating he had never wronged his wife and wouldn't scheme such an act for insurance money. Though he had financial difficulties, he wouldn't do something so crazy. The car's slide into the sea could have been caused by multiple factors, and it couldn't be proven that he had pushed it. According to the police simulation experiment at the scene of the situation of a car in end gear sliding into the sea, there are 3 cases. The first case is the car is parked on a flat surface. If it slides, it is because someone intentionally pushed the car. The second case is the car is parked on a slope, and as soon as the handbrake is released, it will slide. The last case is the car was originally parked on a flat surface, but the person in the passenger seat moved the position, causing the car to start sliding. Through these 3 simulations, it was shown that the critical point for the car to slide was not fixed. The appellate judge concluded that defendant Park Tae-hyun lacked sufficient financial motive to murder Soo-hyun, and there were multiple possible scenarios for the car sliding into the sea. They couldn't definitively prove Tae-hyun had pushed the car. After deliberation, the court ruled that while Tae-hyun wasn't guilty of intentional murder, he was guilty of negligent homicide. Based on the Special Act on the Treatment of Traffic Accidents, the appeals court overturned Tae-hyun's life sentence, and instead sentenced him to 3 years in prison. Still dissatisfied, Tae-hyun appealed to the South Korean Supreme Court. Ultimately, the Supreme Court overturned the appellate verdict and declared Tae-hyun not guilty. The justices argued that while a defendant could be convicted based on circumstantial evidence alone, such evidence must be without any reasonable doubt. The defendant hadn't been the primary decision-maker about the entire Jimodo Island trip. The intimate relations in the car appeared to be at the victim's request, rather than the defendant's initiative. Before the accident, the defendant's health wasn't good, showing signs of dizziness and wanting to go to a hotel to rest. There were indirect facts suggesting the accident wasn't intentional. Therefore, the evidence presented by the prosecution didn't meet the required standard, leaving room for reasonable doubt. Additionally, there was no other evidence that could convict the defendant. After being freed, Tae-hyun immediately took the insurance contracts to the insurance company, demanding compensation but was denied. The insurance company believed Tae-hyun likely murdered Soo-hyun, arguing her death wasn't accidental, and therefore refusing to pay. Subsequently, Tae-hyun sued the insurance company. On December 12, 2022, the trial opened at the Seoul Central District Court. At trial, the defendant insurance company pointed out that although Tae-hyun had been found not guilty, his changing of beneficiary information in many of Soo-hyun's insurance contracts was highly suspicious. Additionally, given the suspicious circumstances of Soo-hyun's death, they couldn't process the compensation. Plaintiff Tae-hyun argued that the insurance company was trying to avoid payment by using this as an excuse. He had been found not guilty in the previous drowning case, and the insurance company had no right to use that as grounds for denying compensation. After a period of trial, the court ruled in favor of the insurance company. Tae-hyun appealed. Finally, the appeals court reversed the decision, ruling against the insurance company and ordering them to pay all insurance benefits to Tae-hyun. A year later, Tae-hyun received the enormous insurance payout, totaling 1.25 billion won, approximately $962,000. Some believe Tae-hyun's purpose was clear from the beginning. He had meticulously planned everything, from changing insurance beneficiaries to his wife's accident, calculating each step carefully. As an insurance consultant, he understood legal loopholes and ultimately succeeded in receiving the massive insurance payout as intended. During this process, he deliberately hit the protective railing, then used the pretext of checking the damage to put the car in neutral without engaging the parking brake. He got out of the car alone for inspection, causing Soo-hyun and the vehicle to slide down the dock's ramp into the sea. 1 year after the incident, the trial opened at the Sunshin branch of the Gwangju District Court. At trial, the prosecutor argued that defendant Park Tae-hyun, due to financial difficulties, particularly the pressure of supporting his daughters after divorce, had planned this incident. He murdered Soo-hyun, disguising it as an accident to fraudulently collect insurance money. On December 31st, 2018, Taehyun had lured the victim to Jipu village dock on Gumido Island under the pretense of watching the sunrise. He then deliberately backed into the dock's protective railing, shifted to neutral, and got out to check the situation. Subsequently, Taehyun pushed the car from behind, causing it to slide into the sea. The defense argued that while Taehyun did have debt problems and wasn't wealthy, his situation wasn't desperate enough to commit murder for money. Moreover, there was no evidence showing he had pushed the car after exiting it. They suggested the car might have accidentally slid into the sea due to strong winds. The prosecutor maintained that Taehyun's financial difficulties were his motive for the crime. Additionally, as an experienced driver, leaving the car in neutral was clearly intentional. Opening a rear window in cold winter weather was highly unusual. Latest investigation results showed the defendant had visited the scene on December 24th, a week before the incident. This behavior raised further suspicions. The car couldn't have slid into the sea without external force, further proving the unnatural nature of the accident. After a period of trial, the court found defendant Taehyun guilty of intentional murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment. After the trial concluded, Taehyun, dissatisfied with the verdict, appealed to the Gwangju High Court. At the appellate court, defendant Taehyun declared his complete innocence, stating he had never wronged his wife and wouldn't scheme such an act for insurance money. Though he had financial difficulties, he wouldn't do something so crazy. The car's slide into the sea could have been caused by multiple factors, and it couldn't be proven that he had pushed it. According to the police simulation experiment at the scene of the situation of a car in N gear sliding into the sea, there are 3 cases. The first case is the car is parked on a flat surface. If it slides, it is because someone intentionally pushed the car. The second case is the car is parked on a slope, and as soon as the handbrake is released, it will slide. The last case is the car was originally parked on a flat surface, but the person in the passenger seat moved the position, causing the car to start sliding. Through these 3 simulations, it was shown that the critical point for the car to slide was not fixed. The appellate judge concluded that defendant Park Taehyun lacked sufficient financial motive to murder Soo-hyun, and there were multiple possible scenarios for the car sliding into the sea. They couldn't definitively prove Taehyun had pushed the car. After deliberation, the court ruled that while Taehyun wasn't guilty of intentional murder, he was guilty of negligent homicide. Based on the Special Act on the Treatment of Traffic Accidents, the appeals court overturned Taehyun's life sentence, and instead sentenced him to 3 years in prison. Still dissatisfied, Taehyun appealed to the South Korean Supreme Court. Ultimately, the Supreme Court overturned the appellate verdict and declared Taehyun not guilty. The justices argued that while a defendant could be convicted based on circumstantial evidence alone, such evidence must be without any reasonable doubt. The defendant hadn't been the primary decision-maker about the entire Jimodo Island trip. The intimate relations in the car appeared to be at the victim's request, rather than the defendant's initiative. Before the accident, the defendant's health wasn't good, showing signs of dizziness and wanting to go to a hotel to rest. There were indirect facts suggesting the accident wasn't intentional. Therefore, the evidence presented by the prosecution didn't meet the required standard, leaving room for reasonable doubt. Additionally, there was no other evidence that could convict the defendant. After being freed, Taehyun immediately took the insurance contracts to the insurance company, demanding compensation, but was denied. The insurance company believed Taehyun likely murdered Soo-hyun, arguing her death wasn't accidental, and therefore refusing to pay. Subsequently, Taehyun sued the insurance company. On December 12, 2022, the trial opened at the Seoul Central District Court. At trial, the defendant insurance company pointed out that although Taehyun had been found not guilty, his changing of beneficiary information in many of Soo-hyun's insurance contracts was highly suspicious. Additionally, given the suspicious circumstances of Soo-hyun's death, they couldn't process the compensation. Plaintiff Taehyun argued that the insurance company was trying to avoid payment by using this as an excuse. He had been found not guilty in the previous drowning case, and the insurance company had no right to use that as grounds for denying compensation. After a period of trial, the court ruled in favor of the insurance company. Taehyun appealed. Finally, the appeals court reversed the decision, ruling against the insurance company and ordering them to pay all insurance benefits to Taehyun. A year later, Taehyun received the enormous insurance payout, totaling 1.25 billion won, approximately $962,000. Some believe Taehyun's purpose was clear from the beginning. He had meticulously planned everything, from changing insurance beneficiaries to his wife's accident, calculating each step carefully. As an insurance consultant, he understood legal loopholes and ultimately succeeded in receiving the massive insurance payout as intended. Others believe Taehyun was innocent, arguing he alone couldn't have planned such a complex and sophisticated insurance fraud scheme. Perhaps everything was just a coincidence, and Taehyun merely happened to become the final beneficiary. Convicting him might have been somewhat forced. Ultimately, the South Korean judiciary seemed to think so too. Story 2. We'll explore a case that occurred in Zillenhot City, Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, which shocked China due to the killer's extraordinary intelligence and frightening talents. In this case, the victims were merely pawns in his twisted game. This tragic story began at 4 p.m. on January 2, 2024, when the Zillenhot Police Department received a panic phone call from a man who said, "Hello, police. My sister has just been murdered. The killer stabbed her multiple times. Her name is Yu Ping, and she lives in Jiaji Township. Please send investigators here quickly." About 10 minutes after receiving the report, police arrived at the scene. When they got there, they found villagers gathered around the house where the murder took place, buzzing with speculation. After preliminary investigation at the scene, police discovered the victim was a woman around 50 years old named Yu Ping. When forensic doctors examined the body, they found multiple stab wounds with blood covering the entire body. The crime scene was in the bedroom, with blood staining the nearby bedding, a heartbreaking sight. The time of death was estimated to be around 3 p.m. that same day, as the blood was still wet and the victim's body was still warm. The person who reported the crime was Yu Ping's younger brother, Zhang Yute. His house was just over 300 feet from his sister's. They were essentially neighbors. According to Yute, that morning while he was working, he received a phone call from Yu Ping's youngest son, Wang Chung, asking him to check on his mother. Upon receiving his nephew's call, he immediately went to his sister's house. However, Yute never expected to find his sister murdered so brutally. Ping was already 50 years old. He couldn't imagine what kind of conflict could have led someone to act so viciously against her. After thoroughly inspecting the house, police found signs of searching in the closet and drawers. The scene appeared to be a robbery homicide. Additionally, police found a blood-stained shirt and pair of men's sneakers in the living room. According to witness statements, only Yu Ping was home at the time. So whose shirt and shoes were these? Could the killer really have been foolish enough to leave his belongings at the crime scene? When police checked the windows and main entrance of the house, they found no signs of damage or scratches from forced entry. This suggested the killer had entered the house easily. Therefore, they suspected it was someone familiar with the family. Beyond these initial clues, police continued investigating the scene. Other officers questioned Yute to learn more about the victim's family. Yute explained that his sister's family had 4 members: her husband Wang Ji, age 55, their daughter Wang Jing, age 26, and their youngest son Wang Chung, age 22. They were a happy, harmonious family who often helped those in need. "We've lived near each other for a long time, and Yu Ping never had conflicts with anyone. If there were any issues, they would have been with her husband Wang Ji. He often competed with other construction contractors. I don't know if he had conflicts with anyone. Yu Ping was just a housewife who took care of her husband and children. How could she have conflicts with anyone?" Zhang Yute added, "I don't understand why Wang Chung called me today to check on his mother. There must be something more to this story. Wang Chung is on his way home now. Questioning him will help clarify things." While team members were examining the crime scene, Xue Ping's 2 children, Wang Jing and Wang Chung, arrived home. When they saw their mother lying in a pool of blood, they burst into tears and rushed toward her. But investigators held them back to allow forensic doctors to continue examining and collecting evidence from the scene. They could only stand at a distance, watching their mother's motionless body in anguish. Another young man had come home with them, Wang Jing's boyfriend, Zhang Lin. Though they weren't married yet, Zhang Lin appeared almost as devastated as Xue Ping's own children. After giving them time to process their grief, police questioned them about what had happened that made Wang Chung call his uncle Yute to check on his mother. The sister, Wang Jing, revealed that around 11 a.m. that day, while working at her company, she received a message from a man named Zhang Bing. The message contained just one line: "The game has just begun." Wang Jing found this strange and didn't understand what was happening. She thought he must be joking or had messaged the wrong number. Wang Jing explained that this person had visited her home several times and was supposedly working at the traffic police department, as well as being a business partner of her father, Wang Ji. Wang Ji was a construction contractor, and working with him were his niece Shui Ru and her husband Wang Jun. About 20 minutes later, he sent Wang Jing another message saying, "I've kidnapped your father. Prepare the ransom money, or he will be killed. The amount is 1 million yuan, approximately $235,000, and don't report this to the police." He also sent a bank account number for the transfer. At this point, Wang Jing wasn't sure if this was real or fake, so she tried calling her father, but he didn't answer. Worried about her father, Wang Jing took leave from work to go home and check if Wang Ji was there. When she arrived home, only her mother and brother were there, and they said Wang Ji had gone out that morning to meet with business partners. Wang Jing immediately called back the kidnapper, who then sent her an address for the money drop at Jiako Park. Wang Jing and Wang Chung prepared the money and went to the location specified by the kidnapper, but when they tried calling him there, he didn't answer. Then he sent another message saying their cousin, Shui Ru, and her husband, Wang Jun, had also been kidnapped, and he needed more money. At that moment, she unexpectedly received a message from her boyfriend, Zhang Lin, saying someone had kidnapped her father and was demanding a ransom at Jiako Park. Wang Jing told him they were already there. At this point, the siblings suddenly realized that usually their mother would call constantly if anything was wrong. But strangely, today she hadn't called at all. When Wang Jing tried calling their mother and couldn't reach her, he asked Uncle Yu Tai, who lived nearby, to check on her. They never imagined their beloved mother would be murdered in her own home. From this information, police recognized this was a serious and complex case. However, police found it very strange. How would a kidnapper use a SIM card registered in his real name to send ransom demands? He was even someone known to the victim's family and provided his own bank account. Wasn't this essentially announcing his crimes? Secondly, one person couldn't possibly kidnap 3 people simultaneously. This suggested either a criminal group was involved or he had kidnapped them one by one. More importantly, police believed this crime had been premeditated, because when the perpetrator killed Shui Ping, he must have known Wang Jing and Wang Chung weren't home, allowing him to quickly carry out the murder. Could the killer be Zhang Bing? Did he deliberately lure Wang Jing and Wang Chung away before killing Shui Ping? Next, police immediately formed 2 task forces. One continued investigating the crime scene, while the other worked to confirm Zhang Bing's true identity and plan the search for his kidnapping victims. Based on the bank account name, investigators discovered Zhang Bing didn't work at the traffic police department, as he claimed, but was instead an unemployed drifter living in Zillenhat who had never married. Police immediately launched a large-scale search in the surrounding area. With the suspect's photo, officers questioned people on the streets, checked guest records at hotels, and traced surveillance camera footage along major routes. They also monitored train stations, common escape routes for criminals. While reviewing surveillance footage near the crime scene, officers spotted Zhang Bing walking on a street about 300 feet from the scene. This increased suspicions that he had killed Shui Ping. During the search for the suspect, on January 4th, officers discovered Zhang Bing was staying at a hotel in the city, and the front desk staff reported he hadn't checked out yet. Police quickly organized a team to apprehend him. However, when they broke down the door, investigators were confronted with a cold corpse lying on the bed. Officers initially thought it was the suspect. After identification, the body in the room was confirmed to be Wang Jun, the husband of Shui Ru, Wang Jing's cousin. After conducting an autopsy, forensic experts estimated the time of death to be around 9 a.m. on January 2nd, before Shui Ping's murder. The victim had died from a severe blow to the head. So this was the room Zhang Bing had rented, using his ID, and inside was Wang Jun's body. It seemed he really had kidnapped 3 people as claimed. With Wang Jun dead, everyone worried about the safety of Shui Ru and Wang Ji. When police questioned the hotel's front desk staff about the guests' movements, they said he had rented the room around 8 a.m. on January 2nd, paid for 10 days in advance, and requested that no one disturb the room, so they hadn't checked on it. This confirmed Zhang Bing was a serial killer operating in the area. The investigation team needed to quickly locate him. However, the bad news wasn't over. On January 5th, police discovered Zhang Bing had used his driver's license to rent another hotel room about 150 feet from the first hotel. When police checked the room, they found Shui Ru's lifeless body on the floor. After forensic examination, they determined she died from mechanical asphyxiation, with no other wounds and no signs of sexual assault. Time of death was estimated to be January 2nd. Combined with the check-in time, police deduced that Shui Ru was killed about an hour after her husband Wang Jun. By this point, the killer had murdered 3 people in one day. He had chosen different times throughout January 2nd to attack his victims. The only person still unaccounted for was Wang Ji. Was he still alive or dead? Of the 3 kidnapped people, the killer had already murdered 2. At this point, everyone understood Wang Ji's chances of survival were slim. The series of murders in the city caused tremendous panic and fear among residents, who were also outraged by the killer's cruel actions. They promised to immediately report any sightings of the fugitive to police. Zhang Bing's photo was distributed through media channels, so citizens could stay alert and report any information about this dangerous suspect. Continuing the investigation, police collected all surveillance camera footage from across the city for review. They also began investigating the victim's social connections more deeply. According to statements from Zhang Lin and Wang Jing, Wang Ji, Wang Jun, and Shui Ru had met with Zhang Bing to discuss a highway construction project, and Zhang Bing had been introduced by Wang Jing's boyfriend, Zhang Lin. The 2 men frequently communicated and met, so how could Zhang Lin not have known Zhang Bing's true background? It seemed illogical. Could Zhang Bing have been hired by Wang Ji's highway project competitors to kill them? But what puzzled police was that these people had known each other before. Why would they turn against each other now? Had there been conflicts between them? And why was Zue Ping, who had no connection to the bidding project, murdered so brutally? To answer these questions, police needed to quickly capture Zhang Bing and bring him to justice. After extensive investigation, police finally spotted Zhang Bing early morning on April 10th. A taxi driver reported taking a passenger matching Zhang Bing's description to Beijing. After reviewing the taxi's camera footage, investigators confirmed it was indeed Zhang Bing. Inner Mongolia police immediately requested assistance from Beijing police to search for the suspect. They also dispatched specialized police forces to Beijing to apprehend this dangerous killer. With Beijing police's support, Inner Mongolia police quickly identified Zhang Bing's hideout. However, when police arrived, he had already fled. They only found items like iodine solution and bandages in the room. Beijing, being China's capital, has a dense population and complex transportation network. If the killer was hiding there, capturing him would be much more difficult. Therefore, Inner Mongolia police continued cooperating with Beijing and Hebei police to implement a 3-sided control measure, determined not to let the killer escape. After checking networks on major routes across all regions, they finally found Zhang Bing's trail. He was in a taxi heading northeast. Police suspected Zhang Bing was fleeing toward the border. Consequently, they immediately sent search notices to 3 northeastern provinces and border police to prevent the killer's successful escape. At this time, Zhang Lin, Wang Jing's boyfriend, who had been assisting the investigation, suddenly provided important information. He warned that Zhang Bing was carrying dangerous weapons, so police should be careful. Though not yet married to Wang Jing, Zhang Lin seemed deeply concerned about her family's tragedy. He was very interested in the clues police had gathered and always enthusiastically supported the investigation team. Upon receiving Zhang Lin's information, local police forces prepared themselves with full equipment to handle any unexpected situations this dangerous criminal might create. To avoid alerting the suspect and risking the taxi driver's life, police closely followed the taxi carrying the suspect, waiting for the right moment to make an arrest. At 2 a.m. on April 16th, thanks to surveillance cameras at a highway toll station, police spotted Zhang Bing sleeping in the taxi. This presented a perfect opportunity to arrest him. When the taxi stopped at the toll station, officers quickly subdued and successfully captured the dangerous killer Zhang Bing. What surprised the police was that he showed no resistance and accepted arrest easily. After his arrest, police transported Zhang Bing back to Inner Mongolia for further investigation. As soon as interrogation began, he immediately confessed, claiming he had planned and carried out everything alone, with no one else involved. However, police noticed that Zhang Bing's confession seemed to be protecting someone who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Why did he insist so strongly on emphasizing that he planned and executed everything alone? To uncover the hidden truth, police continued their interrogation. When police asked about Wang Ji's whereabouts, Zhang Bing confessed that he had killed him and burned the body with gasoline. When police went to the location where Zhang Bing said he had killed Wang Ji, they found only remaining ashes. When police asked Zhang Bing why he killed these victims, he gave a reason. "I took revenge for my girlfriend." So his motive was revenge for his girlfriend. But who is this girlfriend? What conflict did she have with the victims? He said his girlfriend's name was Xiaolan. They had known each other for 2 years, but had never met in person because Zhang Bing met her online, and she was a Chinese-American living in the United States. They only communicated by phone. Zhang Bing claimed that his girlfriend's family had once been wealthy, but had faced sudden misfortunes. Her father was imprisoned, and her mother died from illness in America. Xiaolan had told Zhang Bing that she had lost all her family members, and he was now her only support. After taking care of her mother's funeral, she planned to return to Beijing to meet him. Xiaolan had said her parents left her substantial assets in China, but Wang Ji's family and the couple Wang Jun and Shui Ru were trying to seize these assets for themselves. Worried about her parents' assets being coveted by others, she planned to return to China on January 30th, coinciding with her first meeting with Zhang Bing. On January 30th, as planned, Xiaolan was supposed to return to China. But strangely, when Zhang Bing called her that day, he couldn't reach her, and her social media accounts showed no activity. Xiaolan seemed to have vanished without a trace. At this point, Zhang Bing suspected that Wang family might have kidnapped and killed her to seize her assets. With the initial goal of finding his girlfriend's whereabouts, since Zhang Bing was already acquainted with the Wang family, around 7 a.m. on January 2nd, 2024, he arranged to meet Wang Ji under the pretense of discussing the upcoming highway project at a field on the outskirts of the city. When Wang Ji arrived, Zhang Bing suddenly attacked and restrained him, demanding information about his girlfriend Xiaolan's whereabouts. But Wang Ji insisted he didn't know who that girl was. In a fit of rage, Zhang Bing stabbed him multiple times, then used gasoline to burn his body in this deserted field. After committing the crime, he reasoned that since he would face either the death penalty or life imprisonment anyway, he decided to eliminate everyone who could potentially harm his girlfriend. Later that morning, around 8 a.m., he texted Wang Jun to meet at a hotel to discuss the highway project. Wang Jun immediately agreed and quickly arrived at the meeting point. However, Zhang Bing had arrived earlier with an iron bar, and as soon as Wang Jun entered the room, he struck him hard in the head, killing him instantly. After committing the crime, he paid for several days' stay and posted a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the main door. Around 9:30 a.m., he used Wang Jun's phone to text his wife, Shui Ru, asking her to meet at another hotel. He then booked a room at a hotel about 150 feet from where he had just killed Wang Jun. When Shui Ru saw the message from her husband's phone, she went to the hotel without suspicion. As soon as she closed the door, Zhang Bing, who was hiding behind it, strangled her until she stopped breathing and became motionless. Just 5 minutes later, the killer left the room, again paid for several days, and instructed the front desk not to disturb the room he had rented. After leaving the hotel around 11 a.m., Zhang Bing drove to Wang Ji's house. There he found Shui Ping and her son Wang Cheng at home. Realizing it would be difficult to act with 2 people present, he devised a plan to text Wang Jing, claiming her father had been kidnapped, and provided a fake location where she and her brother could bring the money. When Wang Jing and Wang Cheng left the house around 2 p.m., he entered and killed Shui Ping with multiple fatal stab wounds. Since Zhang Bing had been brought to the house by Wang Ji several times before, Shui Ping knew him and opened the door without any suspicion. After committing the crime, he searched the house for any valuable assets to take. Seeing his clothes and shoes were covered in blood, making it difficult to leave, he removed his shirt and shoes and left them at the crime scene, which police later collected. Many officers initially thought these items couldn't possibly have been left by the perpetrator. Zhang Bing's purpose in texting Wang Jing was to lure them away from the house and mislead investigators about the kidnapping victims. While police were searching for the other victims, he would have time to escape and search for his girlfriend Xiaolan. He then went to Beijing to search for his girlfriend, hoping to meet Xiaolan one last time before being arrested and tell her he had eliminated everyone who could harm her. But when he reached Beijing, he still couldn't contact his girlfriend or find any trace of her. Feeling despondent, Zhang Bing no longer wanted to run. He decided that if police found him, he would surrender without resistance. Thus, the killer was captured in Beijing, and when searched, he had no dangerous weapons on him. Zhang Bing also stated he had never carried weapons. Regarding the motive and criminal process that Zhang Bing confessed to, Wang Jing and her brother Wang Chung, still fresh in their grief over losing their parents, were outraged by Zhang Bing's explanation. Wang Jing stated that her family had never known Zhang Bing's girlfriend and didn't know anyone named Xiaolan. Wang Jing believed Zhang Bing's claim that her family was plotting to seize Xiaolan's assets was completely groundless. Police believed that based on Zhang Bing's account of the crimes, he might not be lying about Xiaolan, but Wang Jing and Wang Chung consistently denied this. Was the killer Zhang Bing lying, or was the Wang family hiding the truth? The investigation team thought that finding the woman named Xiaolan would answer their questions. However, this would be harder than finding a needle in a haystack, because there were no real photos of Xiaolan. Zhang Bing had only known Xiaolan online, and the account could have been fake. During discussions, some police officers suddenly noticed something unusual about Zhang Lin, Wang Jing's boyfriend. They found his behavior very suspicious. First, according to Wang Jing's statement, at a party, Zhang Lin had introduced Zhang Bing to the family and said he worked in the traffic department. Did he really not know Zhang Bing was using a false identity? Second, during the manhunt, he was unusually interested in the clues collected by the investigation team and the progress of capturing the suspect. Even Wang Jing and Wang Chung, the victim's family members, weren't as concerned as he was. Was Zhang Lin trying to help the investigation team catch the killer, or did he have other motives? Third, during the operation to capture Zhang Bing at the toll station, Zhang Lin reported that Zhang Bing was carrying dangerous weapons. But when checked, Zhang Bing had no weapons, and he said he had never carried any dangerous weapons. Why did Zhang Lin make such a report? What was his basis for claiming Zhang Bing was armed? Fourth, when he saw the crime scene where Wang Jing's mother was murdered, Zhang Lin showed more grief than even her own children. She was his girlfriend's mother, but he cried inconsolably. These situations seemed quite unusual. Therefore, to avoid alerting their target, police quietly investigated Zhang Lin. Meanwhile, they secretly questioned Wang Jing and shared their suspicions with her. Wang Jing said that Zhang Lin worked at the Inner Mongolia Traffic Police Department. Once, when he invited her family to dinner, he also invited Zhang Bing, and that's how they met. The two men frequently communicated and met. How could he not know Zhang Bing's true background? It seemed very illogical. Subsequently, police called the Inner Mongolia Traffic Police Department to verify if Zhang Lin worked there. Just as they suspected, the department confirmed they had no employee named Zhang Lin. He had lied. Hearing this, Wang Jing was completely shocked. She couldn't believe the man she had loved all this time was a liar. The pain of losing her parents hadn't yet subsided, and now Wang Jing received another shocking revelation. Police investigated Zhang Lin's recent activities. Reviewing surveillance cameras along various routes, they discovered that on January 1st, his car had stopped at a gas station, but the person who stepped out wasn't Zhang Lin. It was Zhang Bing. Thus, Zhang Bing had used Zhang Lin's car to buy gasoline, and the murders occurred the next day. This suggested Zhang Lin likely knew about the entire case. Recognizing Zhang Lin's suspicious behavior, police brought him in for questioning. When faced with police questions, he initially gave evasive answers to avoid the issues. However, Wang Jing was present and exposed his lie about working at the traffic department. Officers also presented evidence from surveillance cameras. At this point, Zhang Lin admitted he knew about the case. He claimed that on the morning of January 2nd, he had gone to meet Zhang Bing to discuss some work when he accidentally discovered Zhang Bing threatening Wang Ji. When Zhang Lin arrived, Zhang Bing allegedly threatened him, saying if he revealed any information to police, he would meet the same fate as Wang Ji. Zhang Lin claimed he was too afraid of Zhang Bing's potential attack to report to police immediately. Police then asked, if you knew Wang Ji had been killed by Zhang Bing, why did you text Wang Jing and Wang Chung to go to Jayaku Park to look for him? Police believed his explanations were contradictory and completely untrue. Under continuous police interrogation pressure, Zhang Lin finally confessed. He revealed that the entire case was a conspiracy between the two of them. However, he had wanted Zhang Bing to take all the blame. Upon learning this truth, Wang Jing couldn't believe it. He had deceived her about his job, and now she learned he was involved in the plot to murder her entire family. Her sorrowful eyes turned to looks of rage toward the man sitting before her. According to Zhang Lin's confession, his relationship with Wang Jing had been planned from the start. It was an elaborate scam without any genuine feelings. Zhang Lin revealed that he initially knew Wang Ji was in the construction business. His goal in pursuing Wang Jing was to gain her family's trust and then defraud them of their assets. First, Zhang Lin had lied about working at the traffic department and having an extensive network of connections. He promised he could help Wang Ji, Wang Jun, and Xueru in major projects. To convince Wang Jing's family that his promises weren't empty words, Zhang Lin reached out to his friend Zhang Bing to pose as a high-ranking official. He arranged several dinner meetings between Zhang Bing and Wang Jing's family. Seeing the plan progressing well, Zhang Lin invented a fictitious highway project. He claimed that in the most recent meeting, there was information about a new highway project being launched with potential profits reaching 50 million yuan, about $11.7 million. Zhang Lin said if Wang Jing's family agreed to bid, he could help them secure the project. Initially, Wang Ji didn't believe Zhang Lin could introduce such a large project. But because Wang Jing and Zhang Lin were preparing to get married, he didn't question it much and said that for such a large project, he would naturally want to participate. When Zhang Lin saw Wang Ji's interest in participating in this highway project, he said Wang Ji first needed to give him 1 million yuan, about $235,000, to establish relationships with the bosses and ensure the bidding would go smoothly. Wang Ji felt that providing 1 million yuan, about $235,000, without any guarantees was too risky. Meanwhile, his niece Xueru and her husband Wang Jun, who were also in construction, heard about this major project and knew about Zhang Lin's connections, so they were eager to participate. As a result, Wang Ji, Wang Jun, and Xueru directly gave Zhang Lin 1.7 million yuan, about $400,000, as preparation fees for the project's initial phase. However, after receiving the money, Zhang Lin spent it extravagantly on a lavish lifestyle. He was actually unemployed, and his only real talent was deceiving others. He had never been involved in any real projects. However, the $400,000 was quickly spent, while the project showed no signs of progress. This made Wang Ji increasingly anxious, and he began asking about the project's status. At this point, Zhang Lin felt he was about to be exposed. If this deception was discovered, he would certainly face many years in prison. Therefore, a crazy idea formed in his mind. Zhang Lin wanted to eliminate everyone who knew about this deception, so he could keep the entire $400,000. However, he didn't want to bear the guilt of these crimes, so he manipulated Zhang Bing to be his puppet and take all the blame. Actually, Zhang Bing's girlfriend Xiaolan was completely fabricated by Zhang Lin. In reality, over 2 years ago, Zhang Lin and Zhang Bing had been colleagues. During his free time, Zhang Lin created a WeChat account pretending to be a woman to flirt with Zhang Bing, knowing he was shy around women but very loyal. He named this fictional woman Xiaolan. Whenever Zhang Lin had free time, he would use the Xiaolan WeChat account to chat with Zhang Bing. Gradually, through sweet words and promises, Zhang Bing became completely lost in this deception and believed it was all real. To further eliminate Zhang Bing's doubts about Xiaolan, Zhang Lin repeatedly asked a woman to pose as Xiaolan during voice calls with Zhang Bing. For over 2 years, Zhang Bing had blindly trusted in this online girlfriend he had never met. Later, Zhang Lin used the Xiaolan WeChat account to swindle large sums of money from Zhang Bing through various excuses. Zhang Lin kept the WeChat account active, and whenever he needed money, he would have the same female accomplice call Zhang Bing to ask for loans. In his scheme to defraud Wang Jing's family, he also had Zhang Bing play the role of a successful official. When the scheme to defraud Wang Jing's family was about to be exposed, Zhang Lin thought of Zhang Bing again. He planned to turn Zhang Bing into his weapon, helping him eliminate all potential threats. To draw Zhang Bing into the conspiracy, Zhang Lin used the Xiaolan WeChat account to fabricate a new story. The chat message read, "My dear Zhang Bing, my family is currently facing an unexpected crisis. My father has been imprisoned, and my mother just died from illness in America. I've now lost all my family members, and you're my only support. After I finish my mother's funeral arrangements, I'll return to Beijing to meet you. Currently, my parents left me some assets in China, but Wang Jing's family and the couple Wang Jun and Xueru want to seize these assets for themselves. Worried about my family's accounts being targeted by many people, I'll return to China on January 30th to meet you and protect my parents' assets. Then we can live together. But on January 30th, Zhang Lin made the Xiaolan WeChat account unreachable, leading Zhang Bing to suspect his girlfriend had met with trouble upon returning to China. Zhang Bing then began to suspect that the Wang family might have kidnapped and killed her to seize her assets. Zhang Lin then added more details to the story, and Zhang Bing became completely convinced that Wang Ji's family had kidnapped his girlfriend. To avenge his girlfriend, and with Zhang Lin's assistance, the killer systematically targeted each victim, according to Zhang Lin's instructions. As for the police's question about why he reported Zhang Bing was carrying dangerous weapons during the manhunt, Zhang Lin said he hoped there would be a confrontation where police would eliminate Zhang Bing. That way, no one would know he was behind everything. But the plan he thought was perfect only temporarily challenged the investigation team and couldn't fool the veteran detectives. Finally, the series of murders committed by Zhang Bing was revealed to have been orchestrated by Zhang Lin. However, even when the case was announced as solved and police told Zhang Bing the truth, he couldn't believe it. The girlfriend he had dated for 2 years was actually just a fictional account created by Zhang Lin. In the trial in Inner Mongolia, Zhang Bing, who had murdered 4 people, was sentenced to death. Although Zhang Lin didn't directly commit the murders, he was the mastermind behind everything. He was deemed a danger to society and was also sentenced to death. This horrific case in Shilin Hot City has left many profound lessons for society. Story 2. In this quiet, old-fashioned town of Rockdale Township, Pennsylvania, where the Amish embrace a life of simplicity, a nightmare unfolded that no one could have ever imagined. The Amish are known for their peaceful way of life, where violence is rare and murder is practically unheard of. But then came Edward Gingrich, a man who would shatter that history in the most brutal and disturbing way possible. He didn't just kill someone. He carved out his victims' organs and stacked them in a grotesque display, leaving behind a crime scene so horrifying that even seasoned investigators were shaken, and it made Edward the first recorded Amish murderer in over 200 years. Of all the cases we've uncovered, this is one that will stick with you for days, making you wonder, if Edward had been taken to a modern doctor sooner, could this tragedy have been prevented? You can let me know your thoughts once you hear the full story, because trust me, this is as tragic as the mind of the man who committed it. For starters, Edward was one of 11 children, born into a deeply traditional Amish family. When he was 18 years old, his family packed up and moved to Crawford County, Pennsylvania, in 1983. Life in an Amish community is all about simplicity, faith, and following strict rules. But from a young age, Edward never quite fit the mold. While most Amish boys grew up learning farming and carpentry, Edward had an unusual fascination with machinery, something that wasn't exactly encouraged in his world. He worked at his family's sawmill, where he quickly developed a reputation as a master mechanic. He had a special talent for fixing diesel engines, something rare for someone in his community. In fact, people often said, but his curiosity didn't stop with machines. He also had an interest in the outside world, something that made him stand out even more. Unlike most Amish men, Edward started spending time with non-Amish locals, forming friendships that others in his community wouldn't dare to. One of his closest friends was Dave Lindsay, an outsider with whom he felt comfortable enough to admit something shocking. He didn't really like the Amish way of life. This was a huge deal. The Amish are taught from birth that their way of life is sacred, that the outside world is filled with temptation and sin. For Edward to openly say he didn't want to be a part of it, that was unheard of. But then Katie Shetler entered the picture. Katie was the daughter of a highly respected Amish elder, and from the start, their relationship raised eyebrows. People whispered that Katie was too good for Edward, that his rebellious nature would cause trouble. But despite the rumors, family pressure pushed Edward to propose. The Amish believe in strong, traditional marriages, and backing out wasn't really an option. So, on a rainy day in 1986, Edward asked Katie to marry him. By the spring of 1987, they were officially husband and wife. At first, it seemed like Edward was settling into married life, just like everyone expected. Katie became pregnant soon after, and before long, she gave birth to their first child, a son named Danny, after Edward's father. From the outside, it looked like Edward was on the right path, married, working, raising a family. But beneath the surface, something was changing. Edward started to pull away from his community. He became distant, withdrawn, spending more and more time alone. It wasn't just that he missed his old friendships or his interest in machinery. This was different. The once outgoing, talkative Edward was now a man who barely spoke. He avoided gatherings, lost interest in his work, and started acting in ways that confused and worried those around him. Naturally, concern for Edward grew among his family and the Amish community. But in typical Amish fashion, they chose to support him the best way they knew how, staying close, offering quiet encouragement, and hoping for the best. What no one could have predicted, though, was that Edward's detachment was just the beginning. Because by July of 1988, Edward's condition took a disturbing turn. Dizzy spells became frequent, and he was sleeping an abnormal amount, sometimes for entire days. His worried wife, Katie, reached out for help. But in their Amish way of life, modern medicine was a last resort. Instead, they turned to a trusted chiropractor, a man favored by the Amish for his natural drug-free remedies, his solution, toe-pulling, foot rubs, and a jar of molasses, the latter meant to purify his blood. The cost? $25. Now let's be real, none of that was going to work. But Edward, desperate and with no other options, went through with it anyway. Despite multiple visits to the chiropractor and more molasses than anyone should ever have to consume, his condition didn't improve. But just when it seemed like everything was falling apart, a flicker of hope appeared. In 1989, Katie gave birth to their second son, and by 1990, they welcomed a daughter. For a moment, it seemed like life might settle down. But Edward? He was already too far gone. His presence in the family became almost non-existent. He avoided his wife and children, showing little to no interest in them. It wasn't just emotional distance. He became physically absent, too, even refusing to sleep with Katie for fear she would become pregnant again. And when he did speak, it was only to mutter strange things under his breath. Things about darkness, about visions, about something coming. By the time 1991 rolled around, Edward was barely a shadow of the man he used to be. His physical health had taken a drastic hit. His once strong and capable hands now trembled with an eerie frailty. His skin had turned pale, almost translucent, and the hollowness in his eyes made it seem like he was peering into a world that no one else could see. Then, as if fate hadn't already dealt him a cruel enough hand, things got even worse. While working in his machine shop, he was exposed to toxic solvents, which only pushed his already fragile body further toward the edge. But here's the thing. The most terrifying changes weren't happening to his body. They were happening to his mind. At first, the signs were subtle, almost easy to brush off. He would mumble to himself under his breath, his words barely decipherable, just a low, constant whisper that unnerved anyone who happened to overhear. But then the whispers grew, became more urgent, more frantic. He started answering questions no one had asked, responding to voices no one else could hear. Then came the laughter, soft at first, then suddenly erupting into maniacal fits that would shake his entire body. His family would find him staring into the distance, lips moving but making no sound, his expression one of pure, unfiltered terror. But the worst was yet to come. One night, without warning, Edward dropped to all fours and began racing around the living room like a wild animal. He howled, an inhuman, guttural sound that sent chills down the spines of everyone in the house. His eyes darted around wildly, as if he were seeing things that weren't there. And then, in a voice that wasn't quite his own, he started raving about giant rabbits with glowing eyes lurking in the dark corners of the house. He swore they were watching him, waiting for him. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, his ramblings took on an even darker tone. He began shouting, screaming really about a war between God and Satan, a battle being waged for his very soul. His family could only watch in horror, unable to do anything but pray that whatever was happening to him would pass. But it didn't. It got worse. By 1992, Edward had descended into full-blown madness. His episodes became unpredictable, violent, and completely unhinged that he could no longer be left alone with his wife and children. At this point, they knew he needed medical intervention. But getting him to a hospital was no easy task. Edward resisted with everything he had, refusing to go willingly. His strength, fueled by some unseen force, was so overwhelming that his family was left with only one option. They had to hogtie him just to get him into the car. When they arrived at the emergency room, chaos erupted. The moment they freed him, Edward snapped. He lunged at nurses, sent medical equipment flying, and thrashed so violently that it took multiple people to hold him down. The medical staff had no choice but to sedate him, finally bringing his madness to a temporary halt. Doctors diagnosed him with a severe psychotic disorder and prescribed antipsychotic medication to calm his symptoms. And for a time it worked. The terrifying visions faded, the violent episodes ceased. But Edward hated the way the drugs made him feel. He described it as being trapped in a slow, foggy world, his body sluggish and his thoughts weighed down. He felt like a zombie, stripped of whatever was left of his identity. And so, like so many before him, Edward made a fateful decision. He stopped taking the medication. Edward's descent into madness reached terrifying depths in the early months of 1993. His mental health had deteriorated so drastically that his wife, Katie, was desperate for any kind of help. In March, she took him to see a well-respected Amish healer named Jacob Troyer, hoping for some kind of remedy. But Troyer took one look at Edward and knew that whatever was afflicting him was beyond any herbal cure or spiritual healing. His words were blunt and chilling. "Your husband has a mental problem. Take him to a hospital. I'm afraid of suicide. Goodbye, and good luck." But whether it was fear, denial, or simply the way the Amish avoided outsiders, Katie didn't take him to a hospital. Instead, the next morning, Edward was taken to a chiropractor. The chiropractor massaged Edward's scalp, gave him some liver pills, and sent him on his way. A man whose mind was on the verge of complete collapse was given a head rub and some pills meant for digestion. Edward was drowning, and everyone around him was pretending he could just float back to the surface on his own. Now, as mentioned earlier, Edward didn't have many non-Amish friends, but one of the few he did have was a man named David Lindsay. David was a born-again Christian, deeply passionate about his faith and determined to save lost souls. When he met Edward at the sawmill, he saw him as someone who needed to be rescued. David wasn't just trying to be a friend, he was trying to convert Edward. He told him that unless he left the Amish faith and became a born-again Christian, he would go to hell. Other evangelists who visited the woodshop repeated the same warnings, pushing Edward to believe that he was trapped, that his wife, his family, and his entire Amish way of life were keeping him prisoner. Edward's mind was already fragile, but these words sent him spiraling further. His paranoia grew. The thoughts that had once been mere whispers in his mind became deafening screams. And soon he began to see his own wife as something far worse than just an obstacle. To Edward, Katie was no longer just the woman who stood in his way. She was the devil. So, on the morning of May 18th, 1993, something inside Edward finally snapped. He had been drowning in depression for months, his mind slipping further into darkness. But that day it was different. Something evil had taken hold. The weight of his torment became unbearable, and as he stood in the kitchen, watching his wife, Katie, go about her mourning, a violent storm erupted within him. Without warning, he struck. His fist slammed into her face with brutal force, sending her crashing to the ground. "I am the devil," he screamed. Katie knew she had to act fast. She turned to her 6-year-old son, Danny, saying, "Run. Get Uncle Dan." Now, Danny didn't hesitate. He bolted out the door, his little feet pounding against the ground as he raced to his uncle's house. When he got there, breathless and wide-eyed, he could barely form the words, saying, "Daddy isn't well." Dan had seen his brother in dark moments before, but this time, something in his nephew's voice sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't just another one of Edward's breakdowns. This was something much worse. He ran toward the house, hoping, praying he wasn't too late. But the moment he stepped inside, those prayers were shattered. The scene before him was straight out of a nightmare. Edward was on top of Katie, his fists hammering into her face over and over again. The sound of flesh meeting bone was sickening, and with every brutal hit, blood sprayed across the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. It was pure, unrelenting violence. Bones cracked beneath Edward's relentless assault, their sharp snaps echoing through the house like the breaking of twigs. Later, when paramedics arrived, they would say Katie's face was so utterly destroyed that she was unrecognizable. Dan wanted to stop it. He wanted to do something. But the brother he knew was gone. What stood before him was a monster, lost in pure, uncontrollable rage. Before he could react, Edward stood up, lifted his boot, and with terrifying force stomped down on Katie's face. The crack that followed was sickening, the sound of bones turning to dust beneath his weight. Dan's stomach twisted. His mind screamed at him to intervene, but fear won. He turned and ran, bolting for help. But if you were Dan at that moment, what would you have done? Would you have stepped in, or would fear have paralyzed you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because the horror was far from over. Edward stood there for a moment, then with chilling calmness, he walked to the corner of the room, slipped on his heavy work boots, and returned to his wife's shattered body. And then he stomped again, and again, and again. Each blow crushed what little remained of her skull until her head was no longer a head, just a mess of blood, bone, and flesh. But even that wasn't enough. Something snapped inside Edward. Moving with eerie precision, he stripped Katie's body of its clothes, then walked to the kitchen. His blood-soaked hands reached for a steak knife, fingers curling around the handle, as if it were just another tool in his collection. Without hesitation, he plunged the blade into her abdomen and dragged it downward, cutting through skin, muscle, and tissue. Blood poured onto the floor, thick and dark, pooling around his feet. But Edward didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. His hands disappeared inside her, and then, in a moment so horrifying it defied all human logic, he began pulling her apart. One by one he removed her organs, her heart, her lungs, her liver, her kidneys, her spleen, her intestines. Each one, dripping with blood, was carefully placed in a neat, methodical pile beside her body. It was surgical, calculated, like he was completing a task rather than committing an atrocity. When it was over, he stood up, wiped his hands on his shirt, and walked to the sink. He turned on the water, letting the deep red stains swirl down the drain, as if washing away all evidence of his monstrous act. Then, as if it were just another day, he picked up his Bible, walked over to the fireplace, and threw it into the flames. After that, Edward turned to his 4-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter, their small faces frozen in fear. In a disturbingly calm voice, he told them to put on their coats, saying they were going to their grandfather's house. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added that he would come back to burn the house down. But fate had other plans. He never got the chance. The ambulance crew had already been warned that the scene was unsafe. The call described a disturbed man, with whispers that Edward was inside, killing his wife. Assistant Fire Chief Andrew McLaughlin immediately recognized the name. He had been to the household about a year earlier, and had seen Edward in one of his terrifying episodes, howling like a wild animal, cackling, spitting, and lashing out as his family and paramedics struggled to restrain him. McLaughlin had been in the ambulance with Edward that day, and remembered the chilling words he had whispered. "My heart is loose. I'm drowning on the inside." This time, the emergency team braced for another violent outburst, but when they found Edward walking calmly down the road with his 2 children, he was eerily quiet. He simply told them that his father would understand. However, when McLaughlin finally arrived at the Gingrich home, nothing could have prepared him for the nightmare inside. Katie's naked body lay sprawled on the floor, her skull shattered beyond recognition. Her internal organs were carefully arranged beside her, a grotesque and chilling sight. McLaughlin, horrified, immediately radioed his crew, ordering them to call the police and keep a close eye on Edward. The brutality of the scene was so overwhelming that one of the EMTs ran outside and vomited. When the police arrived, Edward was promptly arrested. He was read his rights, but he didn't resist. Instead, he freely admitted to killing his wife, as if it was a simple fact. At the station, officers ordered him to remove his boots and coat for evidence. As he did, a piece of flesh fell from his boot, a sickening reminder of what he had done. Even in custody, lost in his delusions, he muttered to the officers, "For some reason, I think we could still save her." It was only after his arrest that doctors finally diagnosed Edward with paranoid schizophrenia. A name was finally given to the illness that had tormented him for so long. But the diagnosis had come far too late to save Katie, too late to undo the horror he had unleashed. Neither the prosecution nor the defense ever disputed that Edward Gingrich had killed his wife. The evidence was clear, the crime undeniable. However, the argument was never about whether he did it, it was about why he did it. His attorney, Donald Lewis, painted a harrowing picture of a man trapped in the grips of severe mental illness, unable to comprehend reality, let alone his own actions. Edward pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, a claim backed by chilling accounts of his deteriorating mental state. Edward had begged for help again and again to his father, to his wife, to his brothers. He spoke of the unbearable headaches that tormented him, of his growing fear that God had abandoned him, and of the dark presence he believed had taken hold of him. He was desperate, spiraling, but no one understood the true depth of his suffering. No one realized the horror that was coming. His wife Katie had lived in quiet submission, as was expected in their Amish community. She was a devoted mother and wife, but her husband was becoming more erratic by the day. Even as Edward's mind crumbled under the weight of his delusions, the Amish way of life rejected modern medicine. Instead of psychiatric care, he was treated by a chiropractor who, for 6 months, massaged his scalp and gave him molasses. Hours before Katie's death, that same chiropractor had treated Edward again, completely unaware of the monster brewing beneath his troubled surface. Then it happened. Edward's psychosis reached its breaking point in the most horrific way imaginable. When the fog lifted, Katie was dead. The brutality of the murder shocked even the most hardened individuals. But was it the act of a cold-blooded killer, or was it the tragic consequence of untreated mental illness? In the year 1994, Edward was convicted of involuntary manslaughter but mentally ill. He was sentenced to 5 years in the prison ward of a mental hospital. The Amish community and the public at large were outraged. Many believed this sentence was far too lenient for such a horrific crime. Mental health professionals and even members of his own community feared what would happen once Edward was released. Yet, there were others who took a different view. Some of Edward's fellow Amish saw his punishment as just, arguing that modern medicine had restored his sanity. They believed he was truly remorseful, that he deserved the opportunity to repent, and that with proper guidance, he could return to the community. Some even offered to take him in, pledging to supervise him. Against public outcry, Edward was released in the year 1998. He was placed in an Amish mental care facility in Michigan, but after an unspecified incident, he was transferred to an Indiana psychiatric unit designated for Amish individuals who required constant supervision. Still, he longed to return home. He wanted to see his children. He wanted to rebuild his life. Eventually, Edward moved back to Crawford County, but the life he had once known was gone. Though 2 of his brothers and his teenage sons had reconciled with him, the rest of the Amish community had not. Edward was shunned, cast out, forced to exist on the fringes of his former life. In the Amish world, shunning isn't just rejection, it's erasure. To be shunned means you are seen but not acknowledged. You are there, yet you do not exist. His teenage daughter, Mary, was placed in the care of her grandparents and was forbidden from seeing him. Anyone who dared associate with Edward risked being shunned themselves. Even his children, innocent as they were not spared. Tensions ran so high that when some of the children attempted to attend a youth prayer meeting, they were arrested for defiant trespass. In April of the year 2007, Edward's desperation reached new heights. He and his sons orchestrated the kidnapping of his 17-year-old daughter, Mary, in a last-ditch attempt to reclaim a piece of the family he had lost. According to an affidavit from Mary's aunt, Clara Gingrich, Mary and Clara had been traveling in a horse-drawn buggy when Edward's brother, Dan, suddenly leapt onto the wagon, seized the reins, and redirected them toward another Gingrich brothers' property. As they neared the barn, Mary's brother grabbed the horses, leading them inside, where Edward and his other brothers were waiting. Surrounded and outnumbered, Mary was given an ultimatum: leave willingly with her father, or the police would force her to go with him. Convinced she had no choice, she went. For 5 days, Mary was missing. To many in the Amish community, the nightmare was repeating itself. A vulnerable young woman was in the hands of the same man who had murdered her mother. Some feared that Edward had suffered another psychotic break, that history would repeat itself in blood. When Mary was finally found, safe but shaken, Edward faced legal consequences once again. However, his punishment was shockingly light. He pleaded no contest to concealing the whereabouts of a child and was sentenced to just 6 months of probation and a $500 fine. Despite regaining contact with some of his family, Edward remained an outcast. He could never fully return to his old life. For an Amish man, exile was a punishment far worse than prison. It was social death. Edward struggled with his guilt for years. He was haunted by the reality that his family could never fully embrace him without risking their own place in the community. His depression deepened, and he became more isolated. His mental state, once stabilized, began to decline once more. Then in the year 2011, nearly 2 decades after the murder of Katie Gingrich, Edward took his own life. He had been living with his attorney for 6 months. One day, the attorney's wife went out to the barn and found Edward's lifeless body hanging. He had left behind only one final message, scrawled in the dust on top of a bucket: "Forgive me, please." In a twist of irony, Edward was finally welcomed back into the Amish community after his death. He was buried beside Katie in an Amish cemetery, a gesture of reconciliation that sparked just as much controversy as his life had. Some saw it as an act of mercy, a way to finally grant him peace. Others saw it as an insult to Katie's memory. Despite their differing views, the Amish community gathered from far and wide to attend the funeral. They stood together in grief, offering support to Edward's brothers and sons. Now that he was gone, his family was no longer outcasts. They could return. They could belong again. And so, the tragic chapter of Edward Gingrich finally came to a close. As you probably already know, the Amish are known for their simple way of life: rejecting modern conveniences and relying on their faith to guide them. But in Edward's case, their rejection of modern medicine may have sealed his fate and that of his wife. Had he received proper psychiatric care instead of natural remedies, Katie might still be alive. Story 3. This desperate cry for help came from Rachel Hendricks, a woman who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rachel was one of 3 close friends who gathered at Amanda Colley's upscale home in a quiet suburban neighborhood on what seemed like an ordinary Thursday morning in August 2015. They were there to comfort Amanda as she struggled through the painful collapse of her marriage, but none of them had any idea that, within hours, their lives would be shattered forever. 911, hello? Ma'am? Ma'am? What's your address? Ma'am? Hello? 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 Did you hear what she said, Esso? No, I didn't. She was screaming bloody murder. Is that gunfire? Oh my God! In this sudden burst of chaos and gunfire, their lives were stolen, leaving behind grieving families and 5 young children who would never see their mothers again. A once tranquil community was thrown into shock and heartbreak. But what could have caused such a horrific attack? What led to this moment of terror? This is the tragic story of Amanda Colley, a woman for whom the help of the courts came far too late. That she is the reason this happened. She didn't give him the fortitude he needed. She didn't tell the truth. She wouldn't confirm what he already knew was true. It's her fault. Amanda had been living in her family home in Mirabella, a beautiful and upscale neighborhood in St. Augustine, Florida. She and her husband, James Colley Jr., had chosen it as the perfect place to raise their children. If you took a walk through their neighborhood, you'd immediately get the sense that the Colley family was living a good life. To anyone on the outside, they seemed like the perfect, happy, and successful family. Neighbors often saw James laughing and playing with their 2 children, 6-year-old Trey and 4-year-old Avery, in the cul-de-sac. The couple was known for hosting lively gatherings, inviting friends over for drinks and celebrations. Even as their marriage started to unravel, Amanda and James appeared to handle it with quiet grace. Whatever struggles they faced stayed hidden behind closed doors. That's why the events of August 27, 2015, were so shocking. Around 9 o'clock that morning, Rachel Hendricks received a message that something was wrong with Amanda. She and Amanda had been friends for years, having met at a mutual friend's party. Along with Lindy Dobbins, the 3 women had formed an unbreakable bond. They babysat each other's children, supported one another in times of distress, and were always just a phone call away. So when Amanda needed them, Rachel and Lindy didn't hesitate. That morning, Rachel had just dropped her kids off at school. Before heading to Amanda's house, she made a quick stop at a friend's home to get her hair done. It was supposed to be a normal day, but for Amanda, the chaos had already begun. Her usually pristine Morabella home had been completely trashed overnight while she was away. When she returned at 9 o'clock that morning, she walked into a nightmare. Drawers had been pulled out, clothes and papers were scattered everywhere, personal belongings had been tossed aside, and even her TV had been smashed to pieces. Strangely, nothing had been stolen. Everything had simply been torn apart, as if someone had been searching for something. Maybe at that moment, Amanda realized just how much danger she was in. Maybe that's why she called her friends over, believing that safety came in numbers. But as that morning would soon prove, no number of people could have protected her from what was coming. Inside the house that morning were 4 people: Amanda, Lindy, Rachel, and Lamar Duberly. Lamar was Amanda's boyfriend. She had been officially separated from her husband James since June, but she had met Lamar months earlier in April. Their connection started as a professional relationship, but slowly evolved into something more personal. By June 2015, after her separation, Amanda and Lamar had begun seeing each other. Can you describe how that relationship started, if it progressed, and how it progressed? The relationship started professionally, and it progressed into a personal relationship. And then we began seeing each other in June 2015. And ultimately, that was an intimate relationship, correct? Correct. Now, Lamar wasn't just any man. He was a force to be reckoned with. A former military officer with an impressive resume, he had attended the U.S. Naval Academy, studied at the Marine Corps University, and even worked at the Pentagon. Sharp, disciplined, and strategic, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen and handled high-stakes situations. Amanda met him while they were both working in corporate management at Fanatics, a sportswear company. As her marriage with James crumbled, she found solace in Lamar. a man who offered stability when everything else in her life was spiraling. And on that fateful Thursday morning, when she returned home to find her house torn apart, Lamar was one of the first people she called. After she got to the house, "Did you hear from her?" "I did." "How did you hear from her? Call or text?" "Amanda FaceTimed me, and I was able to survey the damage with her." Lamar, Lindy, and Rachel arrived, each of them hoping to provide Amanda with comfort and a sense of security. Together, they walked through the wreckage, drawers overturned, belongings scattered, a silent warning that something was terribly wrong. While Amanda and Lindy stayed upstairs, trying to make sense of it all, Lamar took Rachel to the garage to assess the damage. "Did there come a time that you were notified that something was going on in Amanda's house?" "Yes." "And who notified you of that?" "Lindy." "Now, imagine coming home to find your house completely ransacked, drawers pulled out, belongings scattered, every inch of your safe space violated. That alone is terrifying. But before you even have a chance to process the mess, gunshots ring out. Suddenly, a trashed home doesn't seem so bad. Amanda barely had time to react before the chaos escalated. Outside, a man stood in her backyard, gripping a handgun and aiming it directly at the living room. Shattered glass sprayed in all directions as bullets tore through the windows. His furious voice echoed through the air, saying, "Where is he?" over and over again. That man was James Colley, Amanda's estranged husband. And he wasn't just there to scare them. He was out for blood. Inside, Rachel and Lamar froze for a split second. Then reality hit. James wasn't just shooting into the house at random. He was looking for someone, and Lamar didn't need to guess who. With Amanda in the middle of a messy legal battle, her home torn apart, and her new relationship no longer a secret, Lamar knew immediately that he was the target. Without hesitation, Lamar yelled for everyone to run. Then he bolted. He ducked under the garage door and sprinted between two houses in the cul-de-sac, his pulse racing as he put as much distance as possible between himself and the enraged gunman. Now, if you were in Lamar's shoes at that moment, what would you do? Would you leave Amanda behind, or would you make the same choice he did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Meanwhile, Amanda and Lindy, caught further inside the house, had no way out. They did the only thing they could. They ran upstairs. Rachel followed, her instincts screaming at her to find shelter. Amanda locked herself in the bathroom, while Lindy and Rachel dove into the master bedroom closet, barricading the door. Rachel braced herself, her foot pressed against the bottom of the door, her left hand gripping the doorknob with all her strength. Lindy crouched behind a chest of drawers, silent, barely breathing. At this point, James stormed through the front door while his gun was still drawn. He stomped up the stairs, rage fueling every step. He wanted Lamar, but Lamar was gone. Instead, he found Amanda. From inside the closet, Rachel and Lindy could hear him screaming. "I believe Mr. Colley came over and tried to get into the closet door, and Amanda said, 'He's not in there, that's Rachel and Lindy in there.' 'That's Rachel and Lindy.' And Lindy said, 'It's Lindy in here.' I never said anything, but she shouted out and said, 'It's Lindy.' At that time, I heard a shot while Amanda and Mr. Colley were arguing, and that was all I heard of Amanda. But if you think James's rage ended with Amanda, think again. His bloodlust wasn't satisfied. After gunning down his wife, he turned his attention to the master closet, where Rachel and Lindy were hiding. As mentioned earlier, Rachel was using her arm to brace the door while Lindy frantically relayed their desperate situation to the 911 operator. James, growing more impatient by the second, pounded on the door and shouted, "Open the door, open it now." When they didn't comply, he fired. The bullet tore through the door, grazed Rachel's arm, and the searing pain forced her to stumble backward. That moment of weakness was all James needed. He kicked the door open, his eyes wild with rage. But Rachel got lucky. James wasn't looking for her. His target was Lindy. Without hesitation, he stormed past Rachel, giving her the split-second chance she needed. Heart pounding, she turned and ran, fleeing into the neighborhood, desperately searching for help. Meanwhile, Lamar, who had escaped earlier, had also found someone who called 911. But by the time law enforcement arrived, it was too late. James had vanished, leaving behind a house soaked in blood and horror. The once safe home was now a crime scene, a place of unthinkable violence and devastating loss. Information about a deadly rampage in a St. Johns County neighborhood. Investigators say James Colley shot and killed his wife and her best friend. Boss. Lindy had been shot 3 times. Amanda 9. James had shot her once before forcing his way into the closet where Lindy and Rachel were hiding. Then, after killing Lindy, He unleashed 8 more bullets into Amanda's body. He had started with a 9mm handgun, emptying it into Lindy, and when that was out of bullets, he pulled out his .45, a backup weapon, proof that he had come prepared for something far worse than just an argument. This wasn't just a crime of passion, it was pure, calculated rage. But why? Not much is known about the early days of James and Amanda's relationship. Amanda was 36 years old in the year 2015, a year older than James. She was born in Orlando, Florida, and had built a successful life for herself. Professionally, she thrived, and socially, she was surrounded by people who adored her. James, on the surface, appeared just as put together. He worked in the mortgage industry and lived what seemed to be a stable life alongside his wife and children. To those looking in from the outside, he was a devoted father. A man who spent every waking moment with his kids, teaching them how to swim, always present, always involved. His sister Crystal spoke of him with admiration, painting a picture of a loving, family-oriented man. But behind the carefully crafted image of a devoted father and hard-working professional, James harbored a darkness that had been with him for years, a past stained with violence and unresolved trauma. According to his sister, James had grown up witnessing terrifying moments of rage within his own home. He had seen his mother, seething with fury over his father's infidelity, sitting on the stairs with a baseball bat in hand, waiting. The second his father walked through the door, she swung, again and again, her anger manifesting in brutal blows. But the violence didn't end there. Another argument, another eruption of rage. This time she reached for a knife, her temper spiraling out of control. And James stood there, a helpless child, watching it all unfold. He saw what unchecked anger looked like, what it could do, how it could consume a person. Did these moments shape him? Did they plant the seeds of his own uncontrollable fury? A defense lawyer would certainly argue that they did, that James was merely a product of his environment, repeating the cycle he had been exposed to. But trauma alone doesn't excuse what happened that night. By late August of 2015, James and Amanda had been separated for months. He had moved on, or at least that's what everyone thought. James was seeing someone new, yet his obsession with Amanda hadn't faded. Instead, it had festered, growing into something dangerous, something deadly. Amanda had done nothing wrong. She had simply wanted to break free from their toxic marriage, to rebuild a life of her own. But James refused to let her go. His attack wasn't just a crime of passion or a fleeting moment of lost control. It was premeditated. It was the culmination of his growing rage, his need for dominance over the woman who dared to walk away. And in the end, Amanda paid the ultimate price, for nothing more than wanting to be free. Now all of this toxicity comes to a peak when a neighbor sent James a photo, Lamar, shirtless, mowing Amanda's lawn. That was all it took to set him off. Fury consumed him, igniting a relentless storm of abusive text messages and voicemails that wouldn't stop until the day of the murders. In their conversation, he texted her, "Oh, and your boyfriend has been parking at the playground and walking around the back. The whole neighborhood knows. You should just have him park out front like a man. Yeah, everyone knows what you are. Don't worry, I will speak with him face to face sooner than later." Amanda, trying to defuse the situation, responded, "He's not my boyfriend. Like I've told you before, he helps me with the yard work, painting, moving furniture, etc." But James wasn't having it. So why doesn't he park in the driveway if he isn't hiding? And I guess he is married, right? I have a picture of him. These weren't just messages. They were threats. And James had acted on threats before. Amanda had already filed a domestic violence injunction against him, but he had no respect for boundaries. He had violated the order before, once by stealing her clothes from the house and setting them on fire in the yard. In fact, on the morning of Thursday, August 27th, the very day of the murders, James had been in court for violating that order. He had sat there calm, composed, no one knowing that in less than an hour, he would commit an unthinkable act. Now, like many abusive partners, James was a contradiction, one moment desperate for forgiveness, the next consumed by paranoia and rage. Just a day before the murders, on Wednesday, August 26th, he sent Amanda a message dripping with regret. "Please try to start forgiving me so we can move on. I really miss you and our family being together." But this wasn't love. It was manipulation. His so-called remorse was just another tool to control her, and when it failed, he resorted to terror. In the early hours of Thursday morning, at around 4 o'clock, James broke into Amanda's house. He wasn't there to apologize or win her back. He was there to confirm his worst fear, that she had truly moved on without him. As he searched through her belongings, he found all the evidence he needed to send him into a rage. Men's clothing scattered around, adult toys, clear signs that Amanda was seeing